In the sweltering heat of a Texas summer in 2013, Officer David Parker, a 35-year-old cop in Austin, found himself trapped in a marriage that had long since lost its spark. His relationship with Emily, his wife of 10 years, had devolved into distant exchanges and cold, mechanical routines. Emily, a dedicated social worker, worked long hours, and the strain of her demanding schedule, combined with David's night shifts as a police officer, only widened the emotional gap between them. Though they lived under the same roof, it often felt as if they inhabited entirely different worlds, their conversations reduced to brief, impersonal discussions about daily tasks. David had never imagined himself as someone who would stray outside his marriage, but with each passing day, the loneliness he felt became harder to ignore. The opportunity for an affair came unexpectedly one blistering afternoon when David pulled over a black SUV for a routine traffic stop. Behind the wheel was Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old woman who, by appearance, seemed well off. Sarah was married to James Mitchell, a successful businessman in the oil industry. As David approached the vehicle, he noticed that Sarah's demeanor was subdued, almost melancholic. Their initial exchange was purely procedural, but something about the interaction felt different to David. There was an immediate, unspoken connection between them, one that neither needed to put into words. Like David, Sarah was deeply unhappy in her marriage. Her husband, James, though financially successful, was emotionally distant. He spent more time at work than at home, leaving Sarah to feel increasingly isolated in a life of luxury that no longer brought her any joy. The brief interaction with David during that traffic stop felt like a breath of fresh air for her. As they spoke, the flirtation between them became more noticeable. What should have been a quick, routine stop turned into a conversation that lasted far longer than it should have. David issued her a warning for a minor infraction, but as Sarah drove away, the memory of their exchange lingered in his mind, stirring emotions he hadn't acknowledged in years. Days later, David found himself thinking about Sarah more than he should. He knew the risks involved in pursuing anything beyond that initial interaction. Austin was a large city, but news still spread fast, especially in his professional circles. As a police officer, David knew his standing in the community would be irreparably damaged if word got out that he was involved in an affair. Sarah, too, was drawn to the possibility of something more. She was tired of being the neglected wife of a man more in love with his career than with her. The encounter with David had stirred emotions she had long buried, and the idea of an affair excited her in a way that both terrified and thrilled her. It didn't take long for their paths to cross again. Within a week of their initial meeting, David and Sarah found themselves together, this time deliberate. Their flirtatious conversations quickly turned into something much more physical, and they began meeting in secluded places far from prying eyes. As a police officer in a city where people trusted him to uphold the law, being involved with a married woman, especially when he was also married, was a scandal waiting to happen. The moral weight of his actions gnawed at him, but the pull he felt toward Sarah was too strong to resist. Every time he thought about ending the affair, he found himself unable to let go, wanting more. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed less worried about the consequences. She had long since accepted that her marriage to James was over in all but name. She no longer cared about maintaining appearances, and the idea of running away with David was starting to take hold in her mind. She fantasized about a life where they could be together without secrecy, where she wasn't trapped in a loveless marriage to a man who barely noticed her. The tension between David's desire to keep things hidden and Sarah's growing need for something real began to create cracks in their relationship. David knew that sooner or later, they would have to make a choice: either end the affair before it destroyed their lives or accept the inevitable consequences of being together. As the months passed and Sarah's pregnancy progressed, her determination to build a future with David only grew stronger. She was eager to escape the shadows and secrecy of their affair, believing the pregnancy was the turning point. For her, it was a sign that it was time for David to leave Emily and fully commit to their new reality. She frequently talked about their plans, the baby's future, and the life they could create together as a family. But David's enthusiasm for the relationship had long since diminished. While David wrestled with his inner turmoil, James, Sarah's ex-husband, had not moved on. He still loved Sarah deeply and was devastated by her decision to leave him. Unable to comprehend why their marriage had collapsed so suddenly, James spent months trying to win her back, but Sarah remained distant, unwilling to reveal the true reason behind their separation. James's desperation turned into suspicion as he started to believe Sarah was hiding something from him. His obsession with uncovering her relationship with David consumed him. He began driving past her house late at night, watching her movements and trying to catch a glimpse of David visiting her. With each passing day, James's fixation grew more dangerous, driven by anger and the desire for revenge. The confrontation between David and James finally came to a head. James accused David of ruining his life, wrecking his marriage, and now trying to take his unborn child. Feeling trapped and increasingly paranoid, David attempted to walk away, but James refused to let him go. The argument quickly escalated when James shoved David, and in a moment of uncontrolled rage, David retaliated. The two men fought violently, both consumed by their emotions. In a moment of sheer panic and fury, David's hands found their way to James's throat. When David finally let go, James collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The horror of what he had done struck David immediately. He knelt down, attempting to revive James, but it was too late. His hands trembled and his mind raced. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. Within minutes, his life had spiraled out of control. What had started as an affair had now escalated into murder, and the realization sent David into a state of shock. For a few moments, he stood frozen, staring at James's lifeless body, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he had just done. He thought of the possible consequences. If anyone found out, his life would be over. Not just his career, but everything, his freedom, his future. The scandal would ruin him, and there was no way to come back from this. His only thought was to hide what had happened, to cover up the crime as best he could. Desperate and panicked, David dragged James's body to the back of his car. His thoughts were a blur the entire time. What would he do with the body? In the dead of night, David drove out to a remote area far from the city. His heart pounded in his chest, the reality of his actions weighing down on him with every mile. When he finally found a secluded spot, he hastily disposed of James's body, burying him in a shallow grave. As he shoveled dirt over the lifeless form, the gravity of his crime settled in. He had killed a man not in the line of duty, but in a fit of rage over a situation he should have walked away from long ago. By the time David returned home, he was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. The weight of what he had done crushed him, and he could barely stand to look at himself in the mirror. He knew he had committed an unforgivable act, and there was no way out now. The guilt gnawed at him, but the fear of being caught loomed even larger. Every day that passed felt like another step toward the inevitable collapse of everything he had worked for. He couldn't go back, but he couldn't move forward either. In the days following James's murder, David's fear of exposure turned into a cold, calculating resolve. The guilt that had plagued him was overtaken by a grim sense of self-preservation. He had gone too far to turn back, and every part of him now screamed for survival at any cost. His thoughts kept circling back to the same conclusion. Sarah could not be trusted. She had been pushing harder than ever for David to leave Emily, and with James's death, he could see her expectations rising. In his mind, it was only a matter of time before she became a threat to his freedom. Sarah, oblivious to the dark turn in David's mind, remained hopeful. Despite the distance and the growing tension between them, she still believed David would eventually choose her. She convinced herself that the turmoil he was going through was just temporary, a reaction to the stress of the affair and his fear of the consequences. When David contacted her to meet under the pretense of discussing their future, Sarah's hopes were rekindled. She imagined that perhaps the pregnancy had finally convinced him to commit, that he would finally leave Emily and start a new life with her and their child. She agreed to meet him without hesitation, eager to hear what he had to say. The location David chose was a quiet, remote area just outside of Austin, a place where they had often gone during the early days of their relationship. It had once been a sanctuary for their stolen moments together, but now it would become the site of something far darker. Sarah arrived that evening with nervous anticipation, her mind filled with thoughts of the future. As she stepped out of her car, she saw David waiting, his face expressionless. She sensed something was off but pushed the feeling aside, assuming his mood was just another sign of the stress they were both under. She walked toward him, expecting a heartfelt conversation, a moment of clarity that would finally bring them together. David, aware of the gravity of the situation, tried to remain composed. He thought he had meticulously covered his tracks. Playing the role of the grieving lover, David attended police briefings and acted as though Sarah's disappearance devastated him. He made a point to ask questions during the investigation, keeping his ear to the ground to learn about the progress detectives were making. Detectives interviewed people who knew Sarah and James, and soon enough, their attention turned towards David. Several people recalled seeing him with Sarah frequently, especially in secluded spots. Questions were raised about the nature of their relationship. Sarah's friends, though they had no direct knowledge of the affair, mentioned the growing distance between her and her husband, James. Furthermore, James's close friends revealed his suspicion that Sarah was involved with someone else, though they didn't know who. The first major breakthrough came when James's body was discovered, buried in a shallow grave outside of Austin. The discovery shook the city. What had started as a missing persons case quickly escalated into a full-fledged homicide investigation. Detectives immediately knew that James's death wasn't a random crime. It was personal. The forensic evidence gathered from the scene suggested a violent confrontation, And it wasn't long before David's connection to both James and Sarah became clear. David, who had hoped his calm demeanor would shield him from suspicion, found himself in a rapidly unraveling situation. The discovery of James's body triggered intense scrutiny on him, especially since he had been romantically linked to Sarah. The police began to focus their efforts on finding Sarah, suspecting that her disappearance and James's murder were linked. He maintained his role as the devastated lover, but those closest to him began noticing subtle changes in his behavior. His calm exterior started to crack. Colleagues at the police department observed that David had become more withdrawn, paranoid even. He was less attentive at work, frequently distracted, and appeared to be struggling under the weight of something unspoken. The turning point came when a second grave was discovered, less than a week after James's body was found. Detectives uncovered Sarah's remains, buried in a remote location not far from where James had been hidden. The manner in which her body was disposed of, carelessly buried in a shallow grave, bore striking similarities to James's case. But it wasn't just the burial that linked the two crimes. Ballistics tests conducted on the bullet casings found at the scene matched the gun David had used to kill Sarah. On top of that, forensic analysis revealed DNA evidence connecting David to both murders, further tightening the noose around him. The weight of the evidence against David was mounting, and detectives weren't the only ones noticing his erratic behavior. His colleagues had witnessed a significant change in his demeanor following the discovery of James's body. He seemed paranoid, avoiding eye contact, and often made mistakes that were unlike his normally precise self. He was no longer the composed and calculated officer they once knew. Instead, he was visibly unraveling, a man on the edge of collapse. Interviews with David's co-workers painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, though they didn't know why. His fellow officers didn't suspect him at first, but as the investigation progressed, whispers of David's affair with Sarah began to circulate within the department. His proximity to the victims, coupled with his strange behavior, made him a prime suspect. The final blow came when detectives began piecing together the timeline of events leading up to James and Sarah's murders. David's affair with Sarah, which had been relatively secret, was now out in the open. Detectives uncovered text messages between the two, revealing the deepening relationship and the pressure Sarah had been putting on David to leave his wife. They also discovered Sarah's pregnancy, a revelation that tied everything together. In the end, it was a combination of forensic evidence, inconsistencies in David's alibi, and his own unraveling behavior that sealed his fate. Detectives were able to link David to both murders definitively, with the motive becoming painfully clear. He had killed James in a fit of rage and later murdered Sarah to cover up his tracks and protect himself from exposure. The investigation, which had initially seemed to stump the city police force, had reached its conclusion. David had thought he could keep his crimes hidden, but the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep he tried to bury it. The trial of David Parker for the murders of James and Sarah became a national spectacle, drawing widespread media coverage and igniting debates about power, betrayal, and the consequences of infidelity. The combination of David's position as a trusted police officer and his deadly affair with a married woman created a narrative that the public couldn't turn away from. News outlets followed every development, from the lurid details of the affair to the gruesome discovery of the bodies. In court, David's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a man who had been pushed to his breaking point. They claimed that the overwhelming stress of his secret relationship with Sarah, her unexpected pregnancy, and James's confrontation had caused David to lose control. Their argument of temporary insanity suggested that David had acted in a moment of extreme emotional turmoil rather than out of cold calculation. They presented David as a man who had been deeply conflicted, struggling with guilt and fear, and ultimately driven to violence by forces beyond his control. But the prosecution took a very different approach. They argued that David Parker had not acted in a fit of passion but with clear intent. The evidence showed premeditation, the way David had lured Sarah to her death, the calculated disposal of both bodies, and his cold detachment in the aftermath. The prosecution portrayed David as a man whose primary concern was his own reputation, a man willing to commit murder to avoid public humiliation and protect his career. They emphasized the brutality of the crimes, the way David had shot Sarah and their unborn child, and how he had strangled James in a fit of rage. The jury, confronted with the overwhelming evidence of David's guilt, deliberated for only a short time before returning a verdict. David was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial, which had riveted the nation for months, concluded with a heavy sentence, given the brutal and premeditated nature of the killings. The judge imposed the harshest penalty allowed under Texas law, death by lethal injection. The death penalty, a controversial subject in its own right, became a point of contention as the trial wound down. However, in Texas, where capital punishment remains a legal consequence for the most heinous of crimes, David's sentence came as no surprise. The trial ended in 2015, but the consequences of David's actions would continue to ripple through the community for years to come. Austin, once seen as a vibrant city where everyone seemed connected, was left to grapple with the horror of what had occurred in its midst. The shocking double murder and the ensuing trial left a stain on the city's collective memory. Residents who had once known David as a trusted law enforcement officer now saw him as a symbol of betrayal and violence. Emily, David's wife, was perhaps the most devastated by the entire ordeal. Not only had she lost her husband to the crimes he had committed, but she was also forced to reckon with the profound betrayal of their marriage. The affair, the lies, and the eventual murders had shattered her world. Now a widow, Emily struggled to pick up the pieces of her life while raising their children alone. The scandal of David's affair and the brutality of his crimes haunted her, as did the inevitable media attention that followed her family wherever they went. For the city of Austin, the murders and the trial left an indelible mark. Residents who had once felt safe and secure now looked over their shoulders, reminded of the fragility of trust and the dark secrets that can fester behind closed doors. The memory of David, James, and Sarah lingered in the city's collective consciousness, a reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed when passions go unchecked. In the end, David Parker's life ended in a cell on death row. The man who had once been respected and trusted by his community was now reduced to a symbol of how destructive secrets, lies, and uncontrolled passion could be. As his execution date loomed, the national attention around the case faded, but for those in Austin, the wounds remained fresh. The affair, the murders, and the trial had left a legacy of pain, sorrow, and unresolved questions about the choices people make and the irreversible consequences of those choices. In the heart of a lively London neighborhood, a respected teacher, adored by her community for her seemingly perfect life, hides a dark secret. Her manipulative affair with her father-in-law triggers a series of events that lead to murder. This is the story of Emily Peterson, a woman whose obsession with control and independence spirals into a deadly tragedy that shocks everyone around her. Emily Peterson, 36, seemed to live a life many envied. She had the image of a dedicated teacher, actively involved in every school and community event. People often admired her devotion to her family, especially to her husband Thomas, who worked tirelessly managing his chain of flower shops. While Thomas focused on expanding the business, Emily stayed at home, raising their children Lily and Max, instilling values of responsibility and kindness in them. During this time, George Williams, Thomas's father, now 65, had retired from the business to enjoy his free time. Once a successful businessman, George was known for his wisdom and insights, frequently attending local events and offering advice to younger generations in the area. After losing his wife, George became more reclusive, though he still maintained a strong presence in the community. Emily admired George from afar, viewing him as a source of strength and stability. However, by 2010, her marriage to Thomas had grown distant. Thomas's focus on the flower shops consumed all his energy. He left early in the morning and returned late at night, always exhausted. Their conversations had dwindled to brief exchanges about bills and the children. The warmth they once shared had faded, leaving Emily feeling isolated, unappreciated, and emotionally neglected. In those lonely moments, Emily turned to George. At first, their interactions were innocent, casual chats after neighborhood events or quick conversations at family gatherings, but gradually their discussions grew deeper. By early 2011, Emily and George had become closer. With Thomas constantly busy, George frequently visited the house, filling in roles Thomas couldn't. Emily appreciated how George always made time for her. Unlike her husband, George listened to her frustrations, sympathized with her struggles, and offered comforting words. George, still grieving his late wife, found solace in Emily's company. He had never fully recovered from his wife's passing in 2009, and though he remained composed, the pain lingered. He saw in Emily a kindred spirit, someone suffering in silence as he was. Their conversations often revolved around their personal difficulties, with George confiding in Emily about how empty his house felt since his wife passed away. Emily, in return, shared how abandoned she felt in her marriage, explaining how Thomas no longer noticed or appreciated her. This shared vulnerability forged a deep emotional bond between them. By mid-2011, George began visiting more often, offering to help around the house or spend time with the children. But both of them knew something was changing. The lines between father-in-law and daughter-in-law blurred. Emily, who had always been seen as a devoted wife, began to enjoy the power she had over George. She could see the effect she had on him, how his demeanor softened whenever they were alone. Gradually, Emily began to manipulate the situation, carefully playing into George's emotions while keeping up her image as the devoted daughter-in-law. She would talk about how much she missed having a partner who truly cared for her, knowing that George, in his vulnerability, would fall into that role. She frequently brought up topics of loss and loneliness, aware that George's emotional fragility would keep him conflicted. By the end of 2011, their relationship had crossed from emotional to physical, though it remained hidden beneath layers of secrecy and guilt. George, torn between his grief and his deepening attachment to Emily, wrestled with the affair. Emily, on the other hand, faced no such struggle. For her, the affair was all about control. She relished the power she wielded over George, a man once considered untouchable in the community. It wasn't love driving her actions, but a calculated thirst for something more. She had grown weary of being the dutiful wife, living in Thomas's shadow. George, with his influence and wealth, became her means to an end. Everything took a dark turn on March 6, 2014, when the police were called to the Peterson residence. Thomas's body was found in the greenhouse, his head brutally struck with a heavy object. What had once been a peaceful retreat where Thomas indulged his love for plants had turned into a crime scene. Blood splattered across the floor, leaving the community reeling in shock. Looking back at early 2012, when their meetings became more frequent and their conversations darker, George, consumed with guilt, often spoke of ending the relationship, citing fear of the consequences. But Emily always convinced him otherwise, using her emotional grip to keep him close. She reminded him of how lonely they both were, how Thomas's neglect of her was unjust, and how they deserved happiness, even if it came at a price. By this point, George was too entrenched in the affair to break free. Emily's manipulation grew more cunning as time passed. She subtly began planting the idea that Thomas's absence would not only be a relief but a necessity. She hinted at how much simpler life would be without Thomas's constant focus on the business, without him always being in the way. George, emotionally drained and fragile, started to agree. He began seeing Thomas not as his son but as an obstacle to the life he and Emily could share. By mid-2013, Emily had gained complete control over George. He was willing to do anything to keep her in his life, even if it meant betraying his own family. But Emily was already looking ahead. She saw a chance to not only free herself from her marriage but also take over the family business. George was aging, and she knew it wouldn't be long before control of the flower shops passed to her. But first, Thomas had to go. As their affair deepened, so did Emily's schemes. By January 2014, she had begun carefully setting the stage for Thomas's demise. She was patient, calculating, and knew her moment was coming. What had started as a secret affair had turned into a dangerous game of manipulation, with George as her pawn and Thomas as her target. On March 2, 2014, everything began to unravel in the Peterson household. What had been quietly brewing for years behind closed doors finally reached its breaking point. Emily, always in control, decided it was time to act. She knew she could no longer uphold the charade of her life. Her affair with George had become more than just a secret. It was now a tangled web of lies and manipulation, threatening to come crashing down. George, weighed down with guilt, hesitated. The gravity of his actions overwhelmed him, and the thought of committing an even greater sin, the murder of his own son, paralyzed him with fear. But Emily was relentless. She had spent years mastering the art of manipulating George, exploiting his weaknesses. She knew exactly how to push George just enough to get what she wanted without scaring him off. Emily framed their situation in a way that allowed him to justify the unthinkable. George, torn between his feelings for Emily and the moral values he once held dear, felt trapped. He believed her when she said that Thomas's death was inevitable, that it was the only way for them to escape the lies. She convinced him it was necessary, a way to cleanse their lives and start fresh. Emily's plan was cold and calculated, like everything else she did. She had thought through every detail, aware that George's fragile emotional state made him easy to manipulate. The plan was simple but ruthless, leaving little trace. She gave George clear instructions, reassuring him that once it was done, they would finally be free. No more secrets, no more guilt. George, despite his inner turmoil, let his emotions cloud his judgment. He was too far gone, too deeply in love with Emily to turn back now. 4 days later, on the night of March 6, 2014, the plan reached its violent conclusion. The Peterson household, usually quiet and peaceful, became the site of a horrific crime. Thomas's lifeless body was discovered in the greenhouse, his head shattered by a heavy object. Blood pooled around him, staining the floor where he had once tenderly cared for his plants. The greenhouse, once a place where Thomas found peace in his work, was now marred by violence and death. The discovery of Thomas's body sent shockwaves through the community. News of the tragedy spread quickly, with neighbors gathering outside the Peterson home, confused and disturbed. The family was well known in the neighborhood, and Thomas's flower shops had long been a staple of the local economy. The idea that such a brutal crime could befall someone so respected was unimaginable. The police arrived quickly, Led by Detective Martin Collins, a seasoned investigator with years of experience handling violent crimes. As he surveyed the scene, Collins immediately sensed something was amiss. There were no signs of forced entry and nothing seemed to be missing. The initial theory of a robbery gone wrong, which seemed plausible at first, quickly fell apart. This crime was personal. Its precision and brutality pointed to someone close to Thomas. By March 8, 2014, the investigation was in full swing. The police began interviewing everyone connected to Thomas, starting with Emily. She played the role of the grieving widow almost flawlessly, but to Detective Collins, something seemed off. Emily appeared upset, but her tears seemed too controlled, her emotions too calculated. She calmly explained how Thomas had come home late the night before the murder and how she had gone to bed early, unaware of anything unusual. Despite her composed demeanor, Collins couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Emily's behavior after the murder was odd. In the days following the tragedy, she didn't appear genuinely grief-stricken. Her routine barely changed. While others in her position might have been overwhelmed by sorrow, Emily carried on as if nothing significant had occurred. Her lack of genuine emotion raised red flags for the detective. Something about her story just didn't add up. Then, on March 20, 2014, a breakthrough came when a hidden phone was found in Emily's closet. The discovery blew the investigation wide open. The phone contained explicit text messages between Emily and George, revealing the full scope of their affair. The texts were detailed, discussing their plans to get rid of Thomas and even hinting at the exact day they would do it. George appeared hesitant in the messages, but it was clear that Emily had orchestrated everything, pushing him toward committing the unthinkable. With this new evidence, Detective Collins knew the investigation had reached a critical turning point. George's involvement was undeniable, and the truth was now just a matter of time. Emily, however, continued to deny everything, insisting the messages were nothing more than fantasy. She portrayed herself as the victim, claiming George had misunderstood their conversations. She painted George as a grieving man who had manipulated her, casting herself as an innocent woman caught in a tragic misunderstanding. But George's guilt was too great to conceal. After the evidence surfaced, he began to unravel. By April 1, 2014, George had completely withdrawn from his usual social circles and family gatherings. His once strong presence had crumbled, and he could barely look his grandchildren in the eyes. The weight of his actions consumed him. He no longer spoke about the future or offered advice. He was a shell of the man he once was, destroyed by his own guilt. When the police finally brought him in for questioning on April 1st, George's calm facade shattered. Confronted with the phone records, George broke down, confessing to the affair. He explained how Emily had drawn him in, using his grief and vulnerability to manipulate him. He admitted that he had fallen for her, but he strongly denied any involvement in Thomas's murder. George described how the affair had spiraled out of control, but he couldn't bring himself to confess to the ultimate crime. Emily, however, remained composed as George confessed. She stuck to her story, continuing to claim that the messages were simply part of a fantasy and denying any plot to harm Thomas. She placed all the blame on George, insisting he had acted out of desperation. But the overwhelming evidence, combined with George's broken confession, told a different story, one of a manipulative woman who had carefully orchestrated her husband's downfall. As the case moved forward, the community was left reeling from the betrayal, wondering how such darkness had been hidden beneath the surface of such a respected family. On April 15, 2014, the quiet streets of the London neighborhood buzzed with shock as both Emily and George were arrested for Thomas's murder. The news spread rapidly, reaching every corner of the community. This was no ordinary crime. It was a betrayal that cut deep, shaking the very foundation of the Peterson family. A family once admired for their success and respectability, Emily had always been seen as the devoted wife, while George had long been respected as a wise and strong figure. The revelation of their affair and involvement in Thomas's death left everyone in disbelief. The trial, which began in early 2015, became a spectacle, drawing crowds from across the city. The courthouse was packed every day with neighbors, colleagues, and even the local media eager to witness the downfall of a family that had once seemed perfect. Cameras captured every moment, and reporters painted Emily as a cold, calculating woman who had manipulated an old man into killing her husband. George, the once proud and respected elder of the community, appeared broken. He looked older than his 65 years, his shoulders slumped, and his face gaunt, as though the weight of his actions had drained the life out of him. Throughout the trial, George broke down multiple times, overwhelmed with guilt. He admitted to the affair, explaining how Emily had slowly gained control of him, drawing him deeper into her web of manipulation. He described how he had never intended for Thomas to die, insisting that his involvement had spiraled out of control under Emily's influence. His remorse was evident, and many in the courtroom felt sympathy for him, but his confession, although filled with regret, did little to absolve him of his role in the crime. Emily, in stark contrast, exuded confidence. She sat in the courtroom with a calm and composed demeanor, showing no signs of guilt like the kind that consumed George. Even as the gruesome details of the murder were laid out, she remained firm in her defense, claiming that George had acted on his own and that she had never intended for things to escalate so far. She maintained that their messages, which clearly outlined a plan to kill Thomas, were nothing more than a fantasy misunderstood by an old man who had become infatuated with her. To the jury and everyone watching, Emily's lack of remorse was chilling. Her cold detachment from the events made it clear that she was the mastermind behind the entire scheme. She had manipulated George from the start, exploiting his vulnerability and using his love for her as a tool to achieve her own ends. It became clear that Emily's motive was never love, but power. The power to control the Peterson family, take over the flower shop business, and rid herself of the marriage that had kept her trapped in a life of duty and routine. George, once a man of integrity, had been reduced to a pawn in her calculated plan, falling so deeply into sin that he could no longer find a way out. As the trial continued, the emotional toll on the Peterson family became increasingly visible. Lily, now 17, and Max, 13, were forced to endure the painful details of their father's murder while also grappling with their mother's betrayal. Lily, who had always admired her mother's strength, was left heartbroken, struggling to reconcile the woman who raised her with the cold manipulator described in court. Max, still so young, could barely comprehend how his entire world had collapsed. The loss of his father and the destruction of his family weighed heavily on him. Both children were left to navigate the shame and confusion that followed them everywhere they went. On October 10, 2015, the verdict was delivered. The jury, after hearing all the details of the case, found Emily guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, a decision that brought some closure to the community but left many unanswered questions. George, although spared from a life sentence, faced his own punishment. He was convicted of lesser charges, but his reputation was irreparably damaged, and his guilt would haunt him for the rest of his life. The social circles where he had once been respected no longer welcomed him, and his family ties were shattered beyond repair. In the aftermath of the trial, the Peterson family was left in ruins. The flower shop business, once a source of pride, struggled to survive. Without Thomas's leadership and with George's involvement in the scandal, many customers abandoned them, and the community's trust in the family was broken. Lily and Max were left to navigate life without the guidance of their parents, both of whom were lost to them in different ways. Lily, standing on the brink of adulthood, bore the family's shame on her shoulders. She tried to stay strong for Max, but the trauma of losing both parents, one to murder and the other to the justice system, took a heavy toll. She often reflected on the days before everything fell apart, wondering how her mother had managed to hide such darkness beneath their seemingly perfect light. Max, still so young, struggled to find his place in a world where both his parents had betrayed him. The emotional scars left by the trial would follow him and his sister for the rest of their lives. As the dust settled on the trial, the community remained divided. Some viewed George as a man who had been led astray, a victim of Emily's manipulation. Others believed that he too bore responsibility for the tragedy, unable to escape the consequences of his own actions. But the most lingering question was, what had truly driven Emily to orchestrate such a horrific act? Was it simply a desire for freedom, or was there something deeper? A hunger for power and control, buried beneath her facade of devotion and duty? The unraveling of Emily's affair and her cold manipulation of George left an indelible mark on the community. It served as a grim reminder that even the most outwardly perfect lives could hide unimaginable darkness. The betrayal, the murder, and the trial left the neighborhood grappling with the haunting truth that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes those we trust the most are the ones capable of causing the greatest harm. At the heart of this tragedy were three individuals whose lives were deeply intertwined. Elena Vincent, the charismatic art gallery owner with an ideal life, her husband, Oliver Reynolds, the town's cherished pediatrician, and Clara Ashford, Elena's closest friend and confidant, a reserved boutique owner with a complex personality. To the outside world, these three epitomized the very essence of Centerville: industrious, amiable, and profoundly engaged in their community. Yet, underneath the community potlucks and PDA meetings, a perilous undertow was developing. A seemingly harmless scheme, fueled by one woman's insecurities, initiated a sequence of events that spiraled into passion, deception, and eventually tragedy. Elena and Oliver Reynolds' romance became a small-town myth. They encountered each other on a hot summer day in 2005 at Centerville's annual 4th of July celebration. Elena, formerly Elena Caldwell, was overseeing the lemonade stand, her hair shimmering under the sun. Oliver, who had just moved to town to begin his role at the local clinic, was immediately enchanted. Their romance swiftly became a flurry of secretive smiles in crowded spaces, late-night chats on Elena's porch swing, and shared aspirations for a love-filled future. Within 6 months, Oliver proposed, gifting Elena a simple diamond ring at sunset atop the Mill Road Bridge. Their wedding the subsequent spring in the town square became the social highlight of the year. To outsiders, the Reynolds appeared to have everything. Oliver was swiftly adored by both colleagues and patients, his enthusiasm for healthcare infectious, and his kind nature winning over even the most challenging cases. Elena's career soared as her innate charm and sharp business instincts made her the preferred contact for art acquisitions in Centerville. They purchased a picturesque home on Maple Street, complete with a white picket fence and a vast backyard ideal for the family vision. Their house became a central spot for community events, from summer cookouts to festive gathering. To their friends and neighbors, Elena and Oliver were the exemplary couple, the living testament that true love prevailed. However, as time elapsed, fissures started appearing in their perfect exterior. The children they longed for never arrived. Despite numerous medical efforts, the burden of infertility led to subdued disputes and a widening gap between them. Elena immersed herself in her work, spending extra hours at the gallery and handling more clients than ever before. Oliver found comfort in his clinic, dedicating long hours after appointments to research and providing extra care to his young patient. Externally, they maintained a united front, but those close to them could see the tension mounting. As their 5th anniversary neared, Elena was consumed by doubts and insecurities. She began to question whether Oliver's extended hours of the clinic were purely professional or if there was someone else. The seeds of suspicion, once sown, blossomed quickly in her troubled mind. Clara Ashford moved to Centerville in the summer of 2010, stepping in as the boutique owner after the previous owner retired. With her reserved nature, Clara was a contrast to the lively, extroverted local. Initially, she kept to herself, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings of her boutique rather than the town's frequent social event. It was Elena who first extended a hand of friendship, visiting the boutique one afternoon with a basket of local delicacy. Clara's timid smile and sharp wit struck a chord with Elena, and they quickly became close friends. They connected over their love for intricate designs, their irritation with the narrow scope of small-town life, and their hidden aspirations for adventures beyond Centerville. As Elena's marriage with Oliver strained, she increasingly confided in Clara, who became her confidant, always ready to listen and offer comfort. For Clara, who had few close relationships and a challenging upbringing in foster care, Elena's friendship was invaluable. Despite her complex romantic past, which had left her cautious about love, she admired Elena and Oliver's outwardly ideal relationship, even as she became privy to Elena's escalating uncertainty. In the solitude of her cozy apartment above the boutique, Clara occasionally allowed herself to fantasize about a romance as profound as Elena and Oliver's. She quickly dismissed these thoughts, feeling guilty for even considering them. After all, Elena was her best friend, and Oliver was strictly off-limit. Unbeknownst to Clara, her allegiance to Elena would soon be severely tested, a trial that would redefine her understanding of love, friendship, and her own value. As Elena and Oliver's 6th wedding anniversary neared, Elena's fears about Oliver's loyalty intensified. Each late evening of the clinic, every hastily hidden text message, and each distracted conversation fed her suspicions of infidelity. One warm evening in late August, while Elena sat alone on her porch swing sipping white wine and browsing her phone, she stumbled upon an article about loyalty tests. It explained how some hired actors or persuaded friends to flirt with their partners to gauge their faithfulness. This idea resonated with Elena, morphing in her mind until it seemed the only reasonable solution to her doubts. The next day, Elena invited Clara over for coffee. Surrounded by the scent of fresh muffins in the kitchen, Elena cautiously voiced her concerns about Oliver's fidelity. She confided her fears to Clara, shocking her with a startling request. She asked Clara to test Oliver by trying to seduce him. Clara recoiled in surprise, nearly dropping her coffee, and immediately protested, assuring Elena of Oliver's devotion. Nonetheless, Elena persisted, detailing a plan for Clara to flirt with Oliver, maybe even kiss him, arguing it was merely a test of his loyalty that would either confirm her trust or unveil his betrayal. Clara expressed strong reservations, highlighting the ethical dilemmas and possible repercussions. She stressed how this plan could jeopardize Oliver's trust and damage their friendship. Despite her concerns, Elena implored Clara, invoking their deep friendship and her dire need for certainty. After a moment of intense internal debate, Clara reluctantly consented to Elena's request, though she made it clear she thought it was a serious error. The kitchen atmosphere shifted from warm to tense as both women contemplated the consequences of their agreement. As Clara left the Vinson house that day, she was overwhelmed by a sense of dread, feeling she had consented to a plan that might irrevocably alter their lives. Unbeknownst to her, her premonition was about to become reality. The scheme was put into action on a pleasant September evening during the annual Centerville Fall Festival. The town square buzzed with laughter, music, and the inviting smells of funnel cakes and barbecue, all under the romantic illumination of fairy lights strewn above. Clara arrived later than usual, her hair styled in loose waves and her eyes enhanced with subtle makeup. She wore a flowy sundress, a shift from her typically reserved clothing. As she navigated through the crowd,
she noticed Oliver at the dunking booth, his t-shirt clinging to his fit frame as he playfully teased the students trying to dunk him. Amid the festival's hustle, Clara gathered her courage and approached Oliver's booth. She greeted him with a flirtatious tone that was uncharacteristic of her, catching him by surprise. Oliver responded courteously but quickly asked about Elena, much to Clara's dismay. Unfazed, Clara continued her act, suggesting they seek some excitement for the evening. Oliver, though polite, appeared slightly puzzled by her behavior. Over the next hour, Clara persisted with her flirtatious efforts, using everything from exaggerated laughter to subtle touches. Each time, Oliver remained polite, but his discomfort grew more apparent. As the evening wore on, Clara unexpectedly found herself enjoying Oliver's company, noticing qualities in him she hadn't before, which deepened her sense of guilt about the charade. In a final audacious move, Clara suggested they meet for coffee alone. Oliver's reaction was swift and clear. He kindly yet firmly declined her suggestion, reminding her of his commitment to his wife. Confused and uneasy, he excused himself and left. Clara was left alone, wrestling with a mix of emotion, relief at Oliver's fidelity, coupled with a surprising hint of disappointment. As she walked home, she couldn't dismiss her thoughts about Oliver, realizing this ordeal had changed her perception of him more than she had expected. In the days after the fall festival, both Oliver and Clara were troubled by unexpected feelings. Oliver, confused and disturbed by Clara's actions, began to see her differently. He noticed things he had previously overlooked: the way her eyes twinkled when she laughed, her graceful movements, her extensive knowledge on various topics. Clara, meanwhile, was consumed with guilt for her deceit. She knew she ought to inform Elena of Oliver's loyalty, yet something restrained her. Each time she recalled that night, she remembered not just her awkward flirting, but also the real connection she had felt with Oliver. Their paths crossed often in the small town, each meeting laden with renewed tension. At the grocery store, their hands brushed while reaching for the same apple, sending a shock of electricity through both. During a town hall meeting, their gazes locked across the room, lingering a moment too long before both averted their eyes. Flustered, Oliver immersed himself deeper in his medical work, spending more time at the clinic than ever. Clara engrossed herself in managing her boutique, rearranging her entire stock to stay occupied. Yet, the more they tried to distance themselves, the more frequently their paths intertwined. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, an unexpected encounter at the boutique changed everything. As Clara was organizing stock, Oliver came by to pick up a special order. Their hands met unexpectedly as they exchanged the packet, charging the air with tension and unspoken sentiment. Overcome with emotion, Oliver confessed his continual thoughts of Clara. Despite her initial protest, Clara found herself irresistibly drawn to him. For a brief moment, they teetered on the brink of a life-changing decision. Then, as if driven by an unstoppable force, they gave in to their desires and shared a passionate kiss. The realization of their actions struck them instantly, compelling them to separate. Clara voiced her shock and dismay, while Oliver, though torn, confessed his deeper feeling. In that silent moment among the boutique's displays, they had crossed a line that would forever change their lives and relationships. The gravity of their actions and its implications for their futures loomed large, signaling the start of a complex and perilous journey. In the weeks that followed, Oliver and Clara's affair deepened in the secrecy of Centerville. They met clandestinely, seizing moments together whenever possible. The storage room of Clara's boutique turned into their haven, a place where they could be their true selves, shielded from the town's scrutiny and their own remorse. Their meetings were an intoxicating blend of passion and intellectual engagement. They spent hours discussing art, debating societal norms, and sharing their aspirations and dreams. Oliver discovered in Clara a soulmate, a person who not only challenged him intellectually but also shared his depth of passion. Clara, for her part, saw in Oliver a complexity and sensitivity that drew her ever closer with each encounter. Yet, their happiness was forever shadowed by the bitter sting of betrayal. Each clandestine kiss and covert touch served as reminders of a trust they were compromising. Elena's oblivious smile haunted them, her image a constant in their mind. As the seasons shifted, Oliver and Clara found themselves entangled deeper in their affair. Despite their repeated resolutions to end it, their emotions intensified, making the concealment of their affair increasingly arduous. They started to picture a life together, transitioning from tentative ideas to solid plan. On a snowy evening, seeking solace in each other's presence, Oliver proposed they leave town and begin afresh elsewhere, escaping their history. The thought excited Clara, but she could not overlook the impact it would have on Elena. Oliver recognized the distress his choices would inflict but felt driven to be truthful about his feelings for Clara. For the first time, they openly professed their love, a declaration that cemented their resolve to forge a future together. This resolution spurred them into action as they started planning their escape from Centerville, exploring new cities and employment opportunities, envisioning a life where they could be openly united. However, the potential pain they would inflict, especially on Elena, cast a shadow over their hopes, infusing their excitement with a melancholy undertone. Unbeknownst to them, their meticulously laid plans were on the verge of collapse as the web of deceit and betrayal they had spun began to come undone. As Oliver and Clara's relationship deepened, Elena increasingly felt isolated. The loyalty test she had devised had spectacularly misfired. Although she was oblivious to the full scope of the betrayal, she couldn't dismiss the nagging sense that something was profoundly amiss. Oliver's behavior had suddenly but noticeably changed. He was distant, frequently lost in thought, and his late hours at the clinic were more common than ever. At home, he seemed distracted. His answers to Elena's questions were vague and noncommittal. Clara, too, had become elusive. Their regular meetups at the boutique were often cancelled last minute, and when they did occur, Clara appeared nervous and distracted. She avoided eye contact and swiftly changed the topic whenever Elena mentioned Oliver. Initially, Elena tried to brush aside her worries, convincing herself she was being paranoid and that her insecurities were clouding her judgment. But as the weeks progressed, the signs became too conspicuous to overlook. One evening while sorting laundry, Elena found a long strand of hair on Oliver's shirt, a hair that was clearly not hers. On another occasion, she overheard him speaking in hushed tones on the phone, quickly ending the call as she walked into the room. The breaking point came when Elena decided to surprise Oliver at the clinic with lunch. He was nowhere to be found, not in his office or any of the consultation room. A passing nurse mentioned she had seen Dr. Reynolds heading towards the back rooms. With her heart racing, Elena made her way there. Through the door's window, she saw Oliver and Clara in close conversation, their heads bent together intimately. As she watched, Oliver reached out and tenderly tucked a strand of hair behind Clara's ear, his hand lingering on her face. In that moment, Elena's world came crashing down. The reality she had been unwilling to face engulfed her like a tidal wave. Her husband and her best friend were in an affair, and it was all initiated by her own misguided test. Holding back tears, Elena hurried away from the clinic,
her mind overwhelmed by what she had just seen. The tension escalated one evening as Elena awaited Oliver's return. When he came back, she confronted him about his affair with Clara, having seen them together herself. Caught off guard, Oliver tried to explain but was interrupted. Their intense exchange was abruptly halted by Clara's unexpected arrival. She had come to confess, not knowing Elena had already discovered the truth. Quickly, the situation escalated as Elena, overwhelmed with anger and betrayal, lunged at Clara. Oliver intervened, attempting to defuse the tension. In the chaos, Elena disclosed her own deceit, the loyalty test she had instigated using Clara. This revelation stunned both Oliver and Clara, layering further betrayal onto an already intricate situation. As the full scope of their mutual deceits came to light, the atmosphere charged with anger, guilt, and pain. Elena, realizing Oliver and Clara planned to leave together, reacted with despair, hurling a vase against the wall. The scene ended with the three of them amidst the emotional and physical ruins, each wrestling with the consequences of their actions and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The idyllic lives they believed they had were irretrievably broken, leaving them to confront the fallout of their decision. The confrontation escalated as Elena, now with a disturbing calm, questioned Oliver and Clara about their intentions to depart together. Oliver tried to explain, but his attempts only inflamed Elena's rage. Clara, burdened by guilt, attempted an apology but inadvertently placed blame on Elena's initial scheme. This provoked a fierce reaction from Elena, who lunged at Clara. Oliver stepped in, restraining Elena, but she managed to scratch his face in her struggle to break free. Seizing the moment of distraction, Elena pushed past Oliver, advancing toward Clara. Retreating from Elena's advance, tripped over the rug. As she fell, she instinctively reached out, grasping Elena for support. The momentum of Clara's fall, combined with Elena's forward movement, propelled them both into the heavy oak bookcase lining one wall of the living room. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a dreadful creak, the bookcase began to tilt. Oliver, realizing what was about to occur, lunged forward with a shout of warning, but it was too late. The bookcase toppled, its substantial weight crashing down on the two women. The sound of splintering wood and breaking glass filled the room, followed by a terrible, echoing silence. Oliver stood paralyzed with horror, staring at the heap of debris where Elena and Clara had stood just moments before. Then, driven by urgency, he began frantically moving books and broken shelves aside. As he worked, he noticed a warm, sticky substance on his hand. In the dim light, he slowly recognized what it was: blood. So much blood. A faint groan from beneath the rubble spurred Oliver to intensify his rescue effort. Someone was still alive. As he delved deeper, a dreadful realization hit him. Only one of them had survived the collapse. The hours following the tragic incident blurred for Oliver. His normally precise and methodical mind was overwhelmed, driven now by sheer instinct and adrenaline. As he uncovered the bodies, he was met with a horrific scene that would haunt him forever. Elena lay still, her eyes open and vacant, a deep cut across her forehead from striking a shelf corner. Beside her, Clara stirred weakly, her hair clotted with blood. Confronted with the grim outcome of their choices, Oliver made a decision that would change their lives irreversibly. Unable to face the loss of both, he checked Elena for any sign of life, though he knew it was in vain. She was gone. In the ensuing hours, engulfed by shock and desperation, Oliver enacted a plan that contradicted all his ethical principles. He meticulously cleaned the scene, concealing broken items and rearranging furniture to obscure any signs of the altercation. Then, under the veil of night, he carried Elena's body to his car. The drive to Willow Creek became the longest of Oliver's life, every shadow seeming to conceal a witness, every noise sounding like the echo of siren. Upon reaching the old Mill Road Bridge, he paused only briefly before releasing his wife's body into the murky depths below. Returning home, he discovered Clara barely conscious on the sofa where he had left her. Together, they fabricated a story. Elena had left abruptly after a heated argument, taking some belongings with her. They surmised she needed time to calm down. They planned to report her missing the next morning if she hadn't returned. As dawn lit up Centerville, Detective Elias Reeves received the call about a missing person. Little did he know, this routine inquiry would draw him into one of the most intricate and unsettling investigations of his career. In the weeks that followed, as search teams scoured the area and posters featuring Elena's smiling face dotted the town, Oliver and Clara clung to their fabricated narrative and each other. However, as the investigation deepened and discrepancies in their story began to surface, they realized that the truth they had desperately tried to hide was emerging. Detective Elias Reeves, known for his sharp insight into human behavior, felt something amiss from his first interview with Oliver Reynolds and Clara Ashford. The probe into Elena Vincent's disappearance was thorough. Reeves and his squad examined cell phone records, interviewed acquaintances, and carefully pieced together the timeline of that tragic evening. Initially, Oliver and Clara's account seemed plausible. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Elena distressed prior to her disappearance. Her car was indeed missing from the Reynolds driveway. But as time passed, inconsistencies in their stories started to show. The turning point occurred when a young fisherman at the Mill Road Bridge caught something heavy. To his dismay, he retrieved a waterlogged purse containing Elena's driver's license. This discovery redirected the investigation, prompting dive teams to search Willow Creek. As the investigation tightened around them, Oliver and Clara's facade began to crumble. Overwhelmed by guilt and sleep deprivation, Clara became progressively unstable. During her third interview with Detective Reeves, she broke down, admitting to the affair but maintaining that Elena's death was unintentional. Confronted with Clara's partial confession, Oliver's resolve weakened, and under intense questioning, he disclosed the entire grim sequence, from Elena's misguided loyalty test to the catastrophic accident and his frantic efforts to obscure it. The conclusive evidence surfaced when Elena's body was discovered in Willow Creek. An autopsy verified that her death was due to blunt force trauma, consistent with the bookcase incident. Ultimately, both Oliver and Clara were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and conspiring to conceal a death. The judge, recognizing the accidental nature of Elena's demise but reproaching their actions post-incident, sentenced them each to 15 years in prison. As the gavel struck, a sigh of relief rippled through Centerville. The ordeal had profoundly disturbed the community, dispelling the facade of a tranquil small town and leaving behind a populace forever altered. In this episode, we explore the case of a newlywed husband who disappeared on his honeymoon. The shocking truth behind his disappearance revealed a web of deception, secret affairs, and ultimately murder. Victor Ruiz was a 45-year-old renowned surgeon living in Santa Cruz, California, known for his dedication to his career and sharp mind. He had built a prestigious reputation in the medical field. Despite his accomplishments, Victor had spent most of his life under the firm control of his mother, Isabella Ruiz. After years of bachelorhood, Victor's life took an unexpected turn when he met Lena Castillo, a 32-year-old fitness trainer from Aspen, Colorado. Victor and Lena met at a high-end gym in Los Angeles, where she worked as a personal trainer and he was a client. Lena's warm smile and energetic personality drew him in, and they quickly struck up a conversation that extended far beyond a typical workout session. Her positive attitude and passion for fitness intrigued him, and soon they were exchanging stories over coffee. What began as casual conversations turned into a deep connection. Over the next few months, their relationship flourished. Victor was charmed by Lena's lively spirit, while Lena admired Victor's calmness and stability. They spent their weekends hiking along the scenic coast of Santa Cruz and exploring local art galleries. Lena even managed to win over Victor's strong-willed mother, Isabella, who surprisingly approved of their relationship despite her usual controlling nature. However, their relationship was far from simple. Lena's need for attention from Victor was obvious, but so was her unusual closeness to Isabella. Friends often remarked on how much time Lena spent with Victor's mother, sometimes giving her more attention than Victor himself. This raised eyebrows, with people wondering if Lena was trying to win over Isabella or if there was something more beneath the surface. Lena often invited Isabella to join them on outings, and the two shared private jokes that occasionally left Victor feeling uneasy. Despite these odd dynamics, Victor believed he had finally found happiness. He proposed to Lena in the spring of 2013, and they swiftly planned a wedding, eager to start their lives together. The couple married just weeks before their honeymoon on Catalina Island, California, where they hoped to unwind and celebrate their new life. But just days into the honeymoon, tragedy struck. Victor's vision of a perfect marriage and a peaceful escape by the ocean came crashing down. He mysteriously vanished from the resort one night, and it wouldn't be long before his body was discovered. For a man who had spent his life in control of his destiny, the final moments of Victor Ruiz's life would be anything but. On June 9, 2013, the sun rose over Catalina Island, a favorite honeymoon destination known for its quiet beaches and tranquil atmosphere. As the day began, Lina Castillo awoke in their hotel suite at the seaside resort, eager to start another day of relaxation with her new husband, Victor. But when she turned to the other side of the bed, she realized he was gone. At first, Lina thought nothing of it. She assumed Victor had gone for an early morning walk or headed to the resort cafe for breakfast. However, as the hours passed with no sign of him, her concerns started to grow. After searching the resort and asking staff if anyone had seen him, Lina finally approached the front desk to report Victor missing. The staff immediately contacted the local authorities, and officers from the Catalina Island Police arrived at the resort around 10:30 a.m. Lina described Victor as a responsible man who had no history of wandering off or making sudden changes to plans. She was certain something had gone wrong. The police began their search by combing through the resort and nearby beaches, trails, and other surrounding areas. As the hours turned into days, their efforts continued, but there was no trace of Victor. By June 12th, the island's mood had shifted from one of relaxation to tension. The search intensified as both the police and local community grew increasingly worried, and Lina's worry turned into despair. Then, on the morning of June 14th, a disturbing discovery was made. A local photographer named Frank Baxter came across the grisly scene while walking along a secluded beach around 6:30 a.m.
Hoping to capture the early light. The area was far from the bustling parts of the island frequented by tourists. As Frank neared the shoreline, something in the water caught his eye. At first, he thought it was debris or a large object tangled in the seaweed, but as he got closer, the truth became clear. It was a body. Horrified, Frank quickly dialed 911, his hands shaking as he described what he had found to the operator. Within minutes, the police were on the scene, sealing off the area from onlookers and tourists. Victor Ruiz's body was found face down in the shallow water, his clothes soaked through, with no immediate signs of struggle. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident, possibly a drowning. However, as the investigators examined the scene, they noticed something was off. Faint bruises marked Victor's neck, barely visible but suspicious. His body was bloated, indicating that he had been in the water for several hours, but his shoes remained on, which struck investigators as odd. People don't typically go swimming fully dressed. Victor's body was sent to the county morgue for a detailed examination, but by that time, it was clear this was no ordinary drowning. Something far more sinister had taken place on this quiet island retreat. When the Catalina Island Police Department arrived at the scene of Victor Ruiz's body on June 14, 2013, it was evident to Detective Angela Martinez, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts, that this wouldn't be an easy case. While the initial call hinted at a possible accidental drowning, the scene told a much different story. The area where Victor was found was remote, far from the main tourist spots like Avalon Beach, where honeymooners and families usually gathered. The sand around his body was undisturbed, and there were no signs of a struggle or footprints leading to or from the water. Yet, Victor's body was fully dressed, including his shoes, which struck the investigators as strange. People don't typically go swimming with their shoes on. Detective Martinez crouched next to the body, noticing faint bruises around Victor's neck. They were subtle, almost concealed by the salt water that had soaked his skin, but enough to raise suspicion. Something about the scene seemed staged. Nearby, Officer Jake Reynolds, a young officer new to the department, worked alongside Martinez, carefully documenting the area with photographs and notes. An autopsy was quickly arranged, but the early signs all pointed to foul play. The body's condition, bloated from hours in the water, made it difficult to identify any obvious trauma. However, the bruising, along with Victor's fully dressed state, left little doubt in Detective Martinez's mind that this was no accident. The beach remained eerily silent that morning as the investigation team worked methodically. They set up perimeter tape and combed the shoreline for clues, searching for anything out of place, whether it was clothing, footprints, or personal belongings that could offer clues. Their tools included metal detectors, forensic kits, and even drones to scan the surrounding area from above. Detective Martinez took charge, directing her team to treat the case as a potential homicide. Meanwhile, officers back at the resort questioned staff and guests, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything strange the night before. Hotel security footage was also reviewed to piece together Victor's final movements. As the investigation progressed, it became more and more clear that Victor hadn't simply wandered off for a midnight swim. He had been drugged, dragged to the water, and left to drown, the ocean used as a cover-up for a much darker crime. The first person the police turned to was Lena Castillo, Victor's wife of just a few weeks. Lena, 32, was from Aspen, Colorado, and had met Victor less than a year before their whirlwind wedding. Before marrying Victor, Lena had worked as a fitness trainer at a luxury gym in Los Angeles. On the surface, she seemed like a cheerful, outgoing woman with a passion for health and wellness, but those who knew her well hinted at a more complex side. Manipulative, secretive, and always calculated. On the morning of June 14, 2013, just hours after Victor's body was found, Lena was brought in for question. Detectives described her demeanor as calm but distant. She wore a large sun hat and sunglasses, refusing to remove them even during the interview. Lena explained that she had woken up that morning to find her husband missing. Initially, she assumed he had gone for an early morning swim, as he had done a few times since they arrived at the Catalina Island resort. But when the hours went by and Victor didn't return, she became worried and called the police. During the interrogation, Lena's story was straightforward, but her behavior raised eyebrows. She spoke calmly, almost too calmly, about her missing husband as if talking about a stranger. When detectives asked her about their relationship, she described Victor as a good man but was vague when questioned about their intimacy during the honeymoon. Detective Angela Martinez, who led the questioning, noticed Lena's lack of emotion. She wasn't behaving like someone who had just lost her husband, Martinez later noted. There was no real sadness, no tears, just a cold detachment that didn't sit right. As the police dug deeper into Lena's background, more troubling details came to light. She had a history of financial issues, with several maxed-out credit cards and unpaid debts. Investigators also discovered that Lena had formed an unusually close bond with Victor's mother, Isabella Ruiz, who had surprisingly joined them on their honeymoon, a detail that struck many as odd. The police began to suspect that Lena might have had a motive for murder. Victor, a wealthy surgeon, had recently amended his will to make Lena the primary beneficiary. If Victor were out of the picture, Lena stood to inherit a substantial fortune. Despite her calm appearance, the police knew they had to dig deeper to understand Lena's true intentions. The second person of interest in Victor Ruiz's death was Amy Liu, a 21-year-old yoga instructor who worked at the beachfront resort where Victor and Lena were staying. Amy was originally from Los Angeles but had moved to Catalina Island to save money for college, where she planned to study kinesiology. Young and carefree, Amy seemed to have a bright future. At least that's what everyone thought. The police soon uncovered that Amy had been involved in a passionate affair with Lena during the Ruiz honeymoon. Several resort employees reported seeing the two women sneaking away together, often while Victor was either asleep or out for a walk. This wasn't just a casual fling. Investigators described Amy as completely under Lena's spell, admitting to having sex with her numerous times after Victor's disappearance, and even after his body was found. Lena, known for her charming but manipulative nature, had easily pulled Amy into her web of deception. On June 22, 2013, Amy was brought in for questioning. Unlike Lena, Amy was visibly shaken and anxious during the interrogation. She confessed to the affair almost immediately but maintained that she had nothing to do with Victor's death. Amy told police that she and Lena had been seeing each other since the couple's arrival on the island, but she insisted she was unaware of any plan to harm Victor. Detective Angela Martinez noted Amy's emotional state, believing that Amy was scared and confused, but not trying to conceal anything about the affair. To the police, Amy seemed more like a pawn in Lena's game than anything else. Amy recounted how Lena had told her that her marriage to Victor was purely a business arrangement and that while she didn't love Victor, she did love his mother, Isabella Ruiz. Lena had even hinted at running away together to the California coast for endless freedom, but Amy never imagined things would go this far. Naive and caught up in the whirlwind of her first romantic relationship with another woman, Amy struggled to comprehend the reality of the situation. Despite her claims of innocence, the police viewed Amy as a person of interest. They were suspicious of her involvement with Lena and wondered whether she had played a role in a larger plan to get rid of Victor. Amy's alibi was shaky. She claimed she had been working at the yoga studio the night Victor disappeared, but her shifts were irregular, and there were no clear records to confirm her whereabouts during the crucial hour. While Amy insisted she had nothing to do with the murder, her involvement with Lena couldn't be ignored. Investigators dug deeper into the young yoga instructor's life, trying to determine just how deeply she had been pulled into Lena's deadly scheme. The investigation took a shocking turn on June 24, 2013, when new evidence came to light. The day started off sunny and warm, typical for Catalina Island in late June. The investigation had stalled until a hotel receptionist, Natalie Brown, came forward with a startling story. Natalie, who had worked at the resort for years, told police she had overheard something disturbing just days before Victor Ruiz's body was found. On the night of June 10, Natalie was working the night shift when she heard strange noises coming from the Ruiz suite. At first, she assumed it was just the couple, but what she heard next made her stop. She distinctly heard two women's voices, one of them being Lena's, clearly engaged in what sounded like rough sex. But what was more alarming, Victor was still in the room, asleep. Natalie explained that she had hesitated to speak up earlier due to her desire to avoid any complications, especially given her personal situation. However, after learning about Victor's death, she felt she had to come forward. When pressed for more details, Natalie confirmed that the other woman she heard was none other than Victor's elderly mother, Isabella Ruiz. This revelation stunned the investigators. They had already confirmed Lena's infidelity, but the fact that she was involved in a sexual relationship with her own mother-in-law was a twist they hadn't anticipated. It completely changed their understanding of the events leading up to Victor's death. Detective Angela Martinez was the first to piece together the implications of Natalie's account. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, and Martinez considered the possibility that Lena and Isabella were using Victor as a cover for their affair. And when that wasn't enough, they plotted to eliminate him. With this new information, the police revisited the crime scene and started digging deeper into the relationship between Lena and Isabella. It wasn't long before more evidence surfaced. Hotel staff recalled frequently seeing the two women together, often leaving Victor behind to have secret encounters in secluded areas of the resort. Other witnesses came forward, describing the strange dynamic between the newlyweds and Isabella. Investigators now believed that Lena and Isabella had been planning Victor's murder for some time. The discovery of their affair added a new layer to their motive. It became clear that Victor had become a barrier to their twisted relationship, an obstacle that needed to be removed. Armed with this new evidence, the police were one step closer to solving the mystery of Victor Ruiz's death. With the new information provided by the hotel receptionist,
Detectives shifted their attention to Isabella Ruiz, Victor's 78-year-old mother. Up until this point, Isabella had been viewed as a grieving, long-widowed mother, but her secret relationship with Lena raised serious doubts about her involvement in her son's murder. Isabella was known in Santa Cruz as a strong-willed, wealthy widow with a commanding personality. Even at her advanced age, she kept a tight grip on her son's life and finances, dictating everything from his social engagements to his diet. She was the type of woman who dressed impeccably in brands like Chanel and Hermes and insisted on driving her black Cadillac. Despite suffering from macular degeneration, she had always expected unwavering loyalty from Victor but had been unusually approving of his marriage to Lena. Detectives invited Isabella Ruiz to the station for a formal interview on June 25, 2013. At first, Isabella appeared calm and composed, playing the role of a heartbroken mother. She expressed disbelief that anyone would suspect her or Lena of wrongdoing. "My son was my precious boy," she said, her voice trembling as she dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "I would never harm my darling Victor." But when detectives confronted her with the receptionist's testimony and the growing evidence of her secret affair with Lena, Isabella's demeanor shifted. The frail, grieving mother was gone. In her place stood a defensive and angry woman, accusing the police of trying to destroy her family. "This is absurd. You're dragging my name through the mud based on gossip from a hotel worker," she snapped. Despite her protests, detectives noticed cracks in Isabella's story. She couldn't explain why she and Lena had been spending so much time alone together during the honeymoon, or why they had been overheard in intimate situations that sounded unmistakably sexual. The carefully constructed image of the innocent mother-in-law began to crumble under the pressure of the investigation. By this point, detectives had a strong theory. Isabella and Lena had conspired to murder Victor so they could continue their illicit relationship without him in the way. Isabella's possessiveness over both her son and her lover was a driving force. She couldn't stand the idea of losing Lena, especially to someone as important as her own son. Though Isabella denied any involvement, the police were becoming more certain they were closing in on the truth. Her evasive responses and the mounting evidence only deepened their suspicions. The once powerful matriarch now found herself at the center of a scandal she had worked hard to keep hidden. By June 28, 2013, the investigation reached a tipping point. Detectives had uncovered enough evidence to directly connect Isabella Ruiz to her son's murder. The shocking revelation of her affair with Lena, combined with the testimony of the receptionist, who overheard the two women having sex in the same room as Victor while he slept, painted a disturbing picture. The grieving mother had now become the prime suspect, and investigators believed she played an active role in Victor's death. Isabella Ruiz, 78, was known for her manipulative nature. She orchestrated every aspect of his existence, from his finances to his relationships. However, her relationship with Lena Castillo, her daughter-in-law, was even more troubling. It extended beyond familial bounds into a secret, sordid affair that ultimately led the two women to plot Victor's demise. On the night of the murder, Isabella, who possessed the villainous mind of a cartoon supervillain, slipped sleeping pills into Victor's drink. Meanwhile, Lena distracted him with sex. Once Victor was unconscious, Isabella and Lena dragged his body to the beach, staging his death to look like a tragic drowning accident. They hoped the ocean currents would erase any trace of their involvement, but forensic experts soon uncovered bruises on Victor's neck and traces of sedatives in his system. The police arrested Isabella Ruiz at her Santa Cruz estate. It was a quiet afternoon, and she was enjoying her daily cup of tea on her front porch when officers arrived. She was taken into custody without a fight and maintained her innocence, showing little emotion as the handcuffs clicked into place, seemingly expecting the arrest all along. Lena Castillo was also arrested, but further investigation revealed that Isabella had masterminded the entire plan, with Lena deeply under her influence. The news of Isabella's arrest shocked Victor's family and friends. Those who once admired her for her strength and sharp wit were now horrified by the truth. The trial of Isabella Ruiz began in November 2014 and quickly became one of the most talked about cases among true crime enthusiasts in California. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney James O'Connor, argued that Isabella had killed her own son to preserve her secret affair with Lena. O'Connor used the shocking details of the mother-daughter-in-law relationship to paint Isabella as a manipulative and cold-hearted killer. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Mark Randall, tried to portray Isabella Ruiz as a frail old woman who could not possibly have orchestrated such a crime. Randall painted Lena Castillo as the true mastermind, claiming that Isabella had been manipulated into covering up for her daughter-in-law. However, Isabella's stern demeanor on the stand did little to win the jury's sympathy, and they were clearly disturbed by the sordid details of the case. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Isabella Ruiz was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lena Castillo, though charged as an accessory to murder, received a lighter sentence of 25 years after cooperating with investigators. The verdict brought some relief to Victor's family, but the damage left behind by the shocking betrayal would never fully heal. Many felt that justice had been served, but Victor's tragic death and the circumstances surrounding it left a dark cloud over the Ruiz family for years to come. After the trial, life changed drastically for everyone involved. Isabella Ruiz, the mother convicted of murdering her son, was sent to a state prison in California. Despite her sharp wit and strong personality, life behind bars proved challenging. Isabella tried to maintain her dignity, but the isolation and stigma of her crime weighed heavily on her. In prison, she was often the target of gossip and disdain from other inmates. Over the years, Isabella's health began to decline, and in 2021 she contracted COVID-19 during a surge in cases. Despite efforts to treat her, she passed away alone in a prison hospital. News of her death made headlines, with some former friends and family expressing mixed feelings about her fate. Lena Castillo, Victor's widow, faced a different kind of consequence after her reduced sentence of 25 years. She served her time in a women's correctional facility, often reminiscing about her life before the murder. During her incarceration, she sought therapy to deal with her feelings of guilt and confusion about her relationships. Lena maintained her innocence regarding the actual murder but acknowledged her role in the events that unfolded. Amy Liu, the young yoga instructor who had become entangled in the scandal, also faced her own struggles. Though Amy was never charged with any crime, the fallout from the trial affected her reputation. She continued to work at the resort for a few years after the events, but the whispers of the affair haunted her. In search of a fresh start, Amy eventually moved to Los Angeles, California, where she enrolled in college.
Rakesh Kamal and Tina Kamal, a married couple, were born in India, and their marriage in 1998 was arranged by their families, as is customary in their culture. However, their love was real, and after settling in the United States, they built not only a home but also businesses that brought them prosperity. From the little that the investigation revealed about their life story, which was based on what they themselves published on their professional profiles, it is known that Rakesh studied at Boston University and Stanford University, as well as at the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology, known as MIT. This education helped him become a software developer and entrepreneur. As for Tina, it was said that she graduated magna cum laude from the University of Delhi in India, known from a young age for her academic excellence, and that in the United States she took a significant step by expanding her studies at the prestigious Harvard University. There, she not only cemented her professional life but also her family future. Rakesh and Tina quickly became part of an exclusive circle of wealthy families. In 2006, their only daughter Ariana was born, who grew up in a loving family that gave her every opportunity. From the time of his daughter's birth, Kamal dedicated himself not only to being affectionate with her but also to sharing his successes in this new role. With this goal, he created a blog where he shared tips on how to be an active and nurturing father. In his writings, he defended the importance of committing to fatherhood, valuing the time spent with children, and showing love at every chance. Meanwhile, Tina became an active member of her daughter's school community and also volunteered for the Red Cross, to which she regularly donated more than $1,000 a year. Her efforts in the cause led her to be named a member of the board of directors in Massachusetts and to join its circle for female donors. As time passed, Ariana grew into a kind, intelligent young lady, always ready to help with initiatives for others. She attended one of the most prestigious schools where, following her mother's example, she worked as a writing tutor, coordinated blood donation campaigns, and assisted at an institute serving migrant families. Simultaneously, the family continued to realize projects. According to state records, in 2016, the couple founded an educational systems company called Edenova. In this company, the husband served as president while Tina took on the role of operations director. As advertised on its website, it was a student success system, and to achieve this, Edenova worked with prominent university professors and business executives with the goal of creating resources that would prepare young students to lead and thrive in the global economy. According to journalistic sources, the couple's presence on the board was a significant endorsement, as their combined experience included creating successful products and organizations, developing advisory, guidance, and educational programs for consumers for major financial firms. Rakesh was considered a pioneer in revolutionary customer service technology and also served as an advisor to Harvard University. The family situation was thriving, especially economically, so much so that in 2019 they decided to buy a grand mansion in one of the most exclusive areas of Massachusetts, further solidifying their position in the local elite. The property, covering 1.7 square kilometers, featured a residence with 11 bedrooms and 13 bathrooms, a movie theater, gardens overlooking wooded trails for walking, a horse riding area, and a swimming pool. It was located at the end of a private cul-de-sac, and the total cost was $4 million, for which they signed a mortgage agreement with a bank. They lived there when Ariana finished high school and was ready to continue her studies at a private liberal arts university in Vermont. Known for being one of the most exclusive and expensive in the region, her parents paid $64,800 annually for tuition and also paid for her music classes, which was her great passion. As soon as she started her first semester at university, the young woman showed a great ability to connect with her peers and plan study sessions. She also immediately joined the choir, where she not only demonstrated her vocal quality but also her ability to build community and work as a team. Living away from home allowed her personality to blossom, which her friends found fascinating. While she was super responsible academically, she also had a surprisingly fun side with a great sense of humor, coupled with a fascination for opera. In summary, they considered her odd, fun, and quirky in the best sense. She aimed to study neuroscience after completing the basic period of her university education. In December 2023, they were getting ready to enjoy a time of great happiness, as Ariana had returned home for the university holidays during the Christmas season, and the three of them would be together after her first semester of studies. They seemed like the perfect family that many envied, at least on the surface. However, during the end-of-year celebrations, an unexpected tragedy left family and friends in shock. On December 28th of that year, at 7:24 a.m., the Dover police received a call to the emergency number. The caller, who identified himself as a member of the Kamal family, reported finding 3 bodies inside the mansion. The caller was Mano Kamal, Rakesh's brother, who had been trying to contact the family for several days and, due to the lack of response, went to the house to check on their well-being and found a heart-wrenching scene that made him call the emergency number. When officers arrived, they searched the house and found that Tina, 54, and Ariana, 18, were lifeless, each in their own bed. Rakesh's body was on the floor very close to his wife. They were the only inhabitants of the house where everything seemed to be in place, and there were no signs of a fight or robbery. The authorities did not confirm whether the 3 victims had been shot or who the main suspect was. There was also no speculation about any potential motive for the crimes. The tight-lipped approach remained, given that this was one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the state. 2 days later, the district attorney described the tragic event as a case of domestic violence and expressed his sorrow and condolences to the entire Kamal family. He asked people to pray for them. In his statement to the media, the possibility of tensions in the family dynamics was noted, which, according to him, often intensified during the holidays. He assured that the tragic incident did not pose a threat to the neighborhood residents, always protected by the police, where the last violent incident was recorded in 2020. He reiterated that there was no police report of domestic problems or intrafamily violence. Although he stated that the cause of death would be determined by the coroner, He confirmed that a firearm was found very close to the father's body at the crime scene but refused to provide further details. The crime deeply shocked the community, where Rakesh was seen as a wealthy entrepreneur and a devoted father who successfully led a promising emerging company. There were also expressions of pain and dismay on social media. The academy where Ariana graduated high school issued a statement calling the incident a devastating loss for the community. And even more devastating was what came to light as the investigations progressed, as it was proven that Rakesh had taken the lives of his wife and daughter by shooting them in the head while they slept in their beds. He then turned the gun on himself. The crime was committed with a Glock 22 caliber .40 pistol, which was not registered in Rakesh's name and he did not have a license to possess it. Authorities contacted the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to track its history. From that moment, details began to emerge about the real situation of the family. Rakesh and his wife had apparently been dealing with serious financial problems in recent years that, according to some reviews, the woman was completely unaware of, as her husband had kept everything in absolute secrecy. Facing the tax authorities, someone acting on behalf of Tina requested the dissolution of their educational systems company, Edanova, in order to file for bankruptcy. They listed debts to employees and creditors ranging from $1 million to $10 million and stated that they did not have the necessary funds to meet them, but their case was dismissed 2 months later due to incorrectly submitted and insufficient documentation. The purchase of the mansion that the family occupied left them struggling with a huge debt to the bank, and as payments were not made on time, by 2023 the interest
And penalties for non-compliance increased. Despite efforts to restructure the debt and reach an agreement, it was impossible. In addition to the overwhelming mortgage debt linked to the mansion, a $1 million loan requested by the man and a series of failed investments both inside and outside the Boston area created a perfect storm for Rakesh, who had until then managed to hide from Tina and Ariana that they were in absolute bankruptcy. But the lie was unsustainable. The bank proceeded to foreclose, and just days before the tragedy, Rakesh had received an eviction order for his luxurious property. Authorities indicated that this might have been the trigger for him to make the terrible decision to end the lives of all three. Several weeks after the events, Tina's family broke the silence. In particular, her brother, Sandeep Bedi, spoke about the devastation over an event they had yet to come to terms with. He said that Rakesh had lied about his finances for years, exaggerating his business credentials, and in his deep need to appear perfect, he dragged his wife and daughter, who, according to Sandeep, had no idea they were drowning in debt. The man revealed that while the eviction was being processed, Tina believed they were advancing in negotiations for the purchase of a $16 million castle by a lake in Tennessee. The real estate agent had received from Rakesh bank statements proving his purchasing capacity for the property, to which he even took his wife and daughter, promising them they would soon move there. Tina, who blindly trusted her husband, began buying furniture, but the contract was never signed. Similarly, it occurred with Tina, whose claims of being a Harvard student could not be verified by the school. Investigations into the case continued, and in July 2024, it was revealed that just 4 days before the tragedy, on December 24th, Tina had inexplicably sent a fax to her insurer to amend her $50,000 life insurance policy. The original document listed her husband as the sole beneficiary, while Ariana was designated as a contingent beneficiary in case something happened to her father. However, the last-minute modification made them both primary beneficiaries, while Manak, Rakesh's brother, was set as a backup beneficiary. Since the tragedy, both families of the couple have been entangled in a legal battle. Manak argues that the insurance company should respect Tina's last will and that the money should be paid out to him as the beneficiary. However, Sandeep, who manages Tina's estate, expressed serious concerns about the circumstances of the deaths and the change in the policy's beneficiary. He has raised questions about the validity of the change request form, particularly due to its timing close to the crimes. Additionally, there are doubts about the authenticity of Tina's signature on the document sent to the insurance company. Although it was stated that she signed the document in the presence of a witness, that person has not yet been located. As of the conclusion of this investigation in September 2024, both were still claiming rights to the policy. According to American media, they could reach a settlement or start a civil trial that could last a long time.
Hello everyone. Today we bring to light a distressing story from Gwalior, India, where challenges for women persist beneath the surface of everyday life. This episode focuses on a harrowing incident from 2009 in Gwalior, telling the tale of Anya, a village girl coerced into matrimony with a man decades her senior. Rajan, a well-established local businessman. Regarded merely as an object, Anya suffered both physical and psychological abuse, compelled to cater to powerful local figures to further Rajan's interests. Anya endured a life of torment but ultimately chose to challenge her oppressors. Her ordeal transcends a mere criminal case, echoing the silent pleas of countless other women enduring similar fates. We will delve into the specifics of this case to shed light on the severe repercussions Anya faced in her quest for autonomy. Remember to subscribe to the channel to keep up with more compelling stories. Born in 1987 in a modest village near Gwalior, Anya's family scraped by on a meager livelihood, the typical lot for working-class families in secluded rural India. As one of 6 children, Anya witnessed the relentless struggle of her parents, laboring on unyielding land. Despite her academic promise and aspirations for higher education, economic hardships curtailed her schooling post-high school. Her responsibilities soon expanded beyond the classroom, assisting her mother on their small farm and caring for her younger siblings, thus foregoing her personal ambitions to help sustain her family. Anya was known for her gentle demeanor and striking features: dark, healthy skin, large expressive eyes, and a warm smile. Her unassuming beauty and industrious nature won her many admirers in her village, yet she maintained a modest, low-profile life. Her aspirations were simple: a tranquil life, further education, and a stable job to support her family. However, her life's path veered drastically when she met Rajan, an influential local businessman born in 1962 in the affluent surroundings of Varanasi, a city renowned for its historic wealth and cultural depth. Rajan grew up in opulence, born to a prominent family that owned extensive land and was deeply entwined with the real estate sector. His family's long-standing connections with government officials laid a strong foundation for their fortune. Raised with a focus on dominance rather than scholarship, Rajan eschewed academic pursuits in favor of expanding his inherited wealth, quickly establishing himself as a formidable figure in Varanasi's business circles. His ventures ranged from real estate to more dubious enterprises such as loan sharking, leveraging his strategic acumen and vast network. Rajan was manipulative, using his wealth and influence without scruple to bend relationships to his will. Known for his extravagant lifestyle and polygamous tendencies, he never shied away from adding to his retinue of wives, regardless of the domestic discord it sowed. Aditi, his first wife, wielded considerable influence over the household, managing the internal power dynamics and often instigating familial strife. To Rajan, women were merely instruments to flaunt his status and facilitate his dealings, even forcing them into degrading liaisons with high-ranking officials to fortify his social and political ties. On June 8, 2009, while passing through a quaint village near Gwalior, Rajan, already married to 3 women, caught sight of Anya, whose understated beauty and youthful innocence captivated him. Despite his existing marital commitments, he was drawn to her and promptly proposed marriage, using wealth to sway her financially struggling family. Overwhelmed by debts and a challenging life, her family saw Rajan's proposal as a means to alleviate their financial distress. This union, though ostensibly a marriage, was for them a desperate financial reprieve. Yet, Anya could not bear the thought of marrying a man 25 years her senior, with whom she shared no emotional bond. In a bid for freedom, she attempted to flee only to be caught. Her father, pressured by economic hardships, inflicted a harsh beating on her. Overcome with fear and resentment yet cornered by her grim reality, Anya was compelled to proceed with the marriage. Her wedding night at Rajan's residence was nothing short of a nightmare. Far from experiencing the tender beginnings of marital life, she was subjected to cruel abuse. Rajan, displaying his brutal nature, did not regard her as his partner but as an object to fulfill his depraved cravings. His abusive actions that night were just the beginning of her torment. Anya also had to navigate the hostility of Rajan's other wives, who, while empathetic to her plight, indoctrinated her into the harsh realities of their household. This initiation into a life of subservience under Rajan's dominance marked the start of her enduring struggle within a home ruled by manipulation and cruelty. Among the wives, the eldest, Aditi, wielded the most power and often brutalized the others to affirm her dominance. Aditi viewed Anya as a threat and treated her with particular cruelty, ensuring her life within Rajan's walls was a living nightmare. Daily, Anya faced not only Rajan's wrath but also that of his other wives, enduring continual abuse merely to survive another day. In this household devoid of love, respect, or compassion, she became nothing more than an instrument to appease Rajan and comply with the demands of those he sought to impress, living a life tantamount to slavery. Anya's existence bore no semblance to that of a wife or even a concubine. Instead, she was relegated to the role of a menial laborer, burdened with relentless chores from dawn till dusk, cleaning, cooking, and washing with no respite. The days were grueling, but the nights brought horrors that were far worse, as she was subjected to Rajan's sadistic tortures, not as his spouse but as an object to satisfy his perverse whims. Rajan's treatment of Anya was merciless, often forcing her into degrading acts that stripped her of dignity and humanity. His tyrannical and sadistic nature reduced her to less than a servant in their intimate moments, enduring unimaginable cruelty. Beyond physical abuse, Rajan compelled his wives to entertain influential figures, further exploiting them to cement his lucrative connections. For those accustomed to his brutality, this was merely another grim facet of their reality, a survival mechanism in the oppressive confines of their home. However, for Anya, each of these forced encounters was a profound violation, an assault on her dignity that sunk her deeper into despair. The first of these dire situations occurred on October 12, 2009, when Rajan made her entertain a notorious politician critical to his network. That night, the politician's actions were even more vicious than Rajan's, treating Anya not just as a plaything but also compelling her to perform acts that deeply scarred her psyche. These horrifying experiences were not just traumatic events but enduring scars on her spirit, diminishing her sense of self-worth with each passing ordeal. On January 2, 2009, as New Year festivities filled the air, Anya seized the moment to flee the torment she endured under Rajan's roof. With the cover of celebration around her, she stealthily left his house and made her way to Mumbai, seeking anonymity in the bustling metropolis to begin anew. In Mumbai, Anya secured employment in a modest factory, a challenging yet liberating departure from the oppressive environment she had left behind. Here, she embraced a quiet existence, always vigilant and cautious to avoid drawing attention to herself, haunted yet driven by the shadows of her past life. These months represented a brief period of cherished liberty, the kind Anya had longed for, even though she was aware that Rajan's extensive reach might someday reclaim her. Indeed, after 3 months, leveraging his influential connections, Rajan discovered Anya at her workplace. Enraged, he publicly assaulted her, disregarding her distress and the shocked witnesses around them. Against her pleas, he dragged her back to his home where he confined her in a solitary room as punishment. For a week, she was left in seclusion, surrounded by darkness and consumed by fear, which broke her spirit further. During this grim period of isolation, Anya realized that resistance would only prolong her suffering. Resigned to her fate, she began to adjust her demeanor, painstakingly presenting herself as compliant and devoted in an effort to mitigate further abuse. Her efforts to conform gradually convinced Rajan of her submission, satisfying his ego and leading him to believe she had fully accepted her subservient role. However, beneath her outward compliance, Anya harbored a deep-seated resolve to escape. She concealed her growing resentment and the pain of her subjugation, biding her time for a final act of liberation. On a fateful evening, as Rajan unsuspectingly entered her room to spend the night, Anya saw her chance. As he drifted to sleep, she silently retrieved a concealed knife, unleashing years of suppressed agony and fury with multiple forceful stabs. These decisive actions culminated in the demise of the man who had made her existence unbearable. Instead of fleeing, Anya remained in the room, staring down at Rajan's lifeless form with a mix of exhaustion and manic relief, her laughter resounding through the corridors as a grim testament to her endured horrors. She collapsed, spent yet unburdened, soon after which the police arrived and apprehended her on charges of murder. At the station, her immediate portrayal was that of a calculated murderer, with little regard for the complex and painful motives behind her actions. Just as her plight seemed irrevocable, an intrepid journalist took interest in her case, initiating a deeper probe into her circumstances. This reporter secured an interview with Anya, allowing her to share her narrative publicly, from the coerced marriage and sustained abuse to the debasing demands of Rajan and his associates, and the dire extremities that compelled her actions. The ensuing article, laden with the raw and poignant details of Anya's ordeal, quickly gained traction on major news platforms, sparking widespread public outrage and empathy. This public outcry prompted a re-evaluation of her case, leading to an intervention by the Central Bureau of Investigation. The CBI's thorough investigation into the testimonies of Anya and other corroborative sources illuminated the true extent of her suffering, reshaping her image from a mere perpetrator to a victim of severe violence and systemic oppression. Anya's trial unfolded in August 2009 at the Central Court in New Delhi, India, drawing significant attention from the public, media, and human rights organizations. The gripping narrative of Anya, who became a perpetrator under duress of violence and coercion, captivated national interest. Over the course of the 10-day trial, both the prosecution and the defense meticulously laid out the context of Anya's drastic measures. The defense strenuously highlighted her dual role as a victim ensnared within a harsh societal structure that often diminishes women's rights and autonomy. Despite a measure of judicial empathy for Anya's dire circumstances, the gravity of her actions dictated a stern response from the court. Ultimately, she was handed a 14-year sentence, a decision that, while harsh, was deemed lenient by some, given the extenuating conditions of her sustained abuse and exploitation. The proceedings also cast light on systemic abuses of power, including misconduct by government officials who exploited their authority at the expense of individuals like Anya. The trial led to public censure and disciplinary actions against several implicated officials, illustrating the broader implications of Anya's ordeal. Her story transcends personal tragedy, touching on deeper societal issues of injustice and the systemic mistreatment that often goes unchallenged. As this case concludes, Anya's narrative stands as a stark reminder of the ongoing struggle for human rights and the imperative to combat all forms of violence against women. What are your thoughts on the outcome? Does a 14-year sentence adequately reflect the complex interplay of victimization and accountability in Anya's case? Or should there have been greater leniency considering her circumstances? Join the discussion in the comments below. Michael Andrews had everything, at least to the outside world. A respected detective lauded for his dedication and discipline, a man who had climbed the ranks, earning the trust of his peers and the respect of his community. But most importantly, he had a family, his wife Emma and their 2 young children. Emma had been by his side long before the badge, through every long night, every missed celebration, and every sacrifice. She was the glue that kept their family together. To her, Michael was more than just a detective. He was a husband, a father, a man who had vowed to always prioritize them. However, over time, the demands of his job began to draw him away. The late-night calls, the endless paperwork, the pressures of law enforcement, it all began to take a toll on him. He no longer came home with a smile, eager to embrace his family. Those days were fading. Emma noticed the change. She observed the weight in his eyes, the slump of his shoulders. He was home less often, and even when present, he seemed distant. She attempted patience, reminding herself of the life they had chosen together. But no matter how hard she tried to bridge the gap, he seemed increasingly distant with each day. Then there was Jason Bennett, a young, driven officer just out of training, eager to prove his worth. Coming from a tough neighborhood, Jason had witnessed his share of struggles. The violence, the poverty. He saw the police force as his way out. Being partnered with Michael seemed like destiny. To Jason, Michael was more than just a partner. He was a mentor, a role model, someone who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. Jason admired him, respected him. Initially, it was simply admiration, the type a rookie might have for a seasoned mentor. But as they spent more time together, this admiration started to evolve into something deeper. Night after night, shift after shift, Michael and Jason were immersed in the same intense world, enduring long hours and sharing profound experiences. This proximity forged a connection that transcended the professional realm. Michael found solace in Jason's company. He felt a level of understanding he hadn't experienced in years. Their bond deepened through casual chats during patrols and moments of vulnerability within the confines of the squad car. Michael hadn't intended for it, hadn't sought it out, but amidst the quiet when the rest of the world seemed distant, something else began to blossom. Something inexplicable even to Michael himself. Then, one night on a routine patrol, both were in the car, talking to pass the time. Michael's gaze was fixed on Jason's. Their eyes locked. The feelings that had been simmering due to their daily interactions became undeniable, and a kiss ensued. The boundary was crossed. What started as innocent conversation escalated into something more. A touch, a lingering glance. Michael was immediately consumed by guilt. This was not who he was. He cherished his wife, his family, yet the attraction was overpowering. He convinced himself it was a mistake, a one-off event, but deep down he knew it was more. For Jason, however, it wasn't a mistake. To him, this was the start of something genuine, something he had unconsciously longed for. His perception of Michael shifted. Prolonged stares, subtle touches. It was no longer mere admiration. It had morphed into something much deeper, far more perilous. Michael struggled to maintain control. He reassured himself it meant nothing, but the guilt tormented him, and still, he found himself unable to distance himself. The affair persisted, clandestine and concealed, yet its impact was becoming evident. Michael grew detached, distracted at home. Emma, always understanding, endeavored to comprehend, yet the fractures in their relationship deepened. For Jason, the moment spent with Michael meant everything. He had never experienced such intense emotions before. He began to observe Michael more intently, yearning for their next private moment. His obsession intensified, though Michael might not have seen it or perhaps chose not to. Jason's emotions began to skew his perception of reality and fantasy. In his eyes, what they had was real. But to Jason, the complexities didn't matter. He was prepared to do whatever it took to maintain their connection. As Michael's guilt compelled him to pull away, Jason's obsession only intensified. Late-night shifts morphed into prolonged late-night conversations. What began as camaraderie had transformed into a clandestine relationship threatening to unravel all that Michael cherished. With the increasing weight of his guilt, Jason sank further into his fixation, unwilling and unable to detach. Home had always been Michael's sanctuary, a haven where the external world ceased to exist, where he could remove his badge and set aside the burdens of duty. But now that sanctuary was slipping away. Emma sensed it. The gap between them wasn't merely physical, it was emotional. Initially, the signs were subtle. Extended work hours once justified by his demanding role, missed family meals, unkept promises to their children. She rationalized these as the toll of life married to a detective. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that a fundamental shift had occurred. Michael was not just preoccupied, he was aloof. When he did return home, he was reticent, his gaze distant, his thoughts seemingly far away. Emma endeavored to connect with him, questioning if all was well, if work was overly stressful. He offered a fleeting smile and reassured her it was merely job pressure. She yearned to believe him, but the reality was increasingly hard to dismiss. The man she had married seemed transformed, altered in indescribable ways. Nights that were once lively with dialogue and laughter had become oppressively silent, and within that silence, Emma's suspicions deepened. Michael, meanwhile, was increasingly ensnared by his dual existence. His bond with Jason had deepened, and what had started as a fleeting affair had evolved into a more demanding relationship, one that consumed his time, energy, and emotions. It was becoming difficult to keep his personal and professional lives separate. The lines between them were fading. The affair was no longer merely a concealed fact. It was influencing their performance at work. There was palpable tension between them, visible to others, though no one confronted it. During their shifts, Michael found his attention wavering, his concentration breaking at crucial times. He longed for their solitary moments, but such opportunities were diminishing, becoming ever more transient. One evening, amidst a critical emergency call, a situation where every second counted, their relationship nearly led to disaster. Michael hesitated, his thoughts preoccupied not with the task at hand but with the mounting guilt. His momentary pause nearly resulted in a tragedy, and it was then that Michael grasped the severity of their situation. Emma, on the other hand, could no longer overlook the accumulating evidence. The unanswered calls, the fabricated explanations, the detachment in his demeanor. Then came the night that altered everything. Michael had told Emma he was on a late shift again, working until morning, but something didn't feel right to her. It was more than intuition. There was a look in his eyes when he left that night, something that compelled her to act. She called the station asking for her husband, but the response she received sent a shiver down her spine. He wasn't there. He hadn't been scheduled to work that night at all. All the suspicions she had been suppressing, all the doubts she had pushed aside, overwhelmed her in that moment. When Michael returned the next morning, looking worn and disheveled, Emma was waiting. She didn't raise her voice or make accusations. She simply asked where he had been. Caught off guard, Michael muttered something about a last-minute emergency he couldn't ignore, but Emma already knew the truth. She revealed that she had called the station, that they had confirmed he hadn't been on duty. Michael froze. The lie deepened the already stifling atmosphere between them. At first, he tried to deny it, his voice rising in defensiveness. "What are you implying, Emma? Do you think I'm cheating on you?" His words resonated through the house. But Emma remained composed. She didn't need to confront him verbally. The truth was evident in the silence that ensued. She turned and walked upstairs, leaving Michael alone with his remorse. In that quiet, the gravity of his actions fully dawned on him. The woman who had been his anchor was drifting away, and it was his own doing. Michael knew it was time to end the facade. He couldn't sustain this double life any longer. The affair had already cost him too much. His peace, his home, his marriage. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone and called Jason. When Jason answered, Michael's voice was subdued, nearly broken. He declared it was over, that their relationship had to cease. It wasn't just compromising his job, it was devastating his life, his marriage, his family. He couldn't continue. But for Jason, Michael's words were not merely a conclusion. They felt like abandonment, a betrayal. Michael's voice wavered, but Jason's response was firm, cold. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he challenged. "You think you can switch it off as if it never happened?" Michael attempted to explain, to make Jason understand, but Jason refused to listen. For Jason, this wasn't merely a fling. It wasn't something to be dismissed with a phone call. For him, it was everything, and now it was unraveling. Michael ended the call, thinking it was finally over, that he could leave the past behind and mend the rifts within his family. However, what Michael didn't realize was that for Jason, the resolution was far from reached. As Michael attempted to move on, to piece together the fragments of his life that had fractured, he remained oblivious to the storm that was brewing. The phone call that was meant to conclude everything, or so Michael believed. He had made his choice, severed ties with Jason, and committed to restoring his marriage. But on the other side of that call, Jason was far from ready to let go. Jason's world had just collapsed. What began as admiration had morphed into something perilously intense, with Michael at its core. Michael had become the anchor in Jason's turbulent life, offering something deeply personal. And now Michael was attempting to withdraw it completely. When Michael declared their affair over, Jason's initial reaction was one of intense fury and feelings of betrayal. "You initiated this," he uttered, his voice quaking with rage. "You can't just abandon it. You don't have the right to dictate when this ends." For Jason, the idea that Michael could unilaterally close the chapter on what they had cultivated was unfathomable. The bond they had established, the emotions they had fostered, weren't things Jason could simply turn off. From that point forward, Michael became the focal point of Jason's fixation. He couldn't relinquish his hold. Wherever Michael went, Jason was there, unexpectedly appearing at the station, lingering near his car, seeking any opportunity to converse. But Michael pulled away, maintaining distance, evading eye contact, steering clear of dialogue.
This only served to inflame Jason's resentment further. Jason's obsession intensified. He started appearing outside Michael's house late at night, lurking in the shadows, observing. He knew where Michael lived, where his family slept. He was familiar with the nuances of Michael's daily routines, and now he was exploiting this knowledge to get closer. Michael, oblivious to the extent of Jason's determination, tried to move on, to concentrate on his family. However, Jason was not ready to release his hold. Michael found it increasingly difficult to perform his duties. He sensed Jason's presence constantly, at the station, during shifts, and even at home. It felt like he was being smothered. Desperate for some respite, he approached his superior, requesting a shift change, anything to create distance between himself and Jason. For a moment, Michael thought it might succeed. He might finally regain some breathing room. But the adjustment in shifts only aggravated the situation. Jason discovered the change, and his anger erupted. To him, this was Michael's attempt to exclude him, to prioritize his family over their connection. In Jason's view, there was one culprit: Emma. Jason began planning meticulously, with a cold, calculated approach. He was well versed in Michael's routines, knew exactly when he would be at home and when he wouldn't. His access to police resources and insider information provided the perfect cover to execute his plan without arousing suspicion. It wasn't solely about eliminating Emma. It was about orchestrating an event that would appear as a random act of violence, perhaps a burglary gone awry. He started shadowing Emma, learning her daily patterns, pinpointing the time she would be alone at home. He familiarized himself with the layout of their house, understanding how to enter and exit unseen. The plan was straightforward: choose the opportune moment, stage a robbery, and remove her from the equation. Jason was convinced it would be simple. He believed that once Emma was out of the picture, Michael would inevitably return to him. What Jason failed to foresee was that his actions would trigger a series of events leading to mutual destruction. As Michael continued to pull away, oblivious to the impending disaster, Jason set his scheme in motion. The night was quiet. Michael was patrolling the urban streets, unaware that his personal world was on the brink of ruin. Back at home, Emma was alone with the children, the house silent, the evening routine undisturbed. But lurking outside was a looming threat. Jason had everything planned to the last detail. He knew precisely when to make his move. Under the veil of night, he approached the house, moving silently. The children were safely upstairs, oblivious to the unfolding horror. His focus was solely on Emma. He breached the house, simulating a break-in, but his intentions were far more sinister. As he confronted Emma in the living room, startled by the intrusion, she had no time to respond. A gunshot broke the quiet, executed with chilling precision. Emma was the sole target, and the children were left unharmed, witnesses to a horror they could never comprehend. Hours later, Michael's phone rang. It was the kind of call no officer ever hopes to receive. There had been a reported burglary at his home. He sped back, his heart racing, his mind in turmoil, but nothing could have braced him for the scene that awaited. Emma was gone. The woman who had supported him, loved him through all adversities, was now lying lifeless on the floor. The children were unharmed, but the irreversible harm had been inflicted. His wife, the one individual he had endeavored to shield, had been taken from him in the most brutal manner. As the initial shock began to wane, the investigation ensued. The crime scene seemed off. The house appeared undisturbed, personal belongings intact. There were no indications of a struggle, no logical explanation for a robbery to culminate in such a manner. Emma was the sole casualty. Questions emerged. Why would an intruder enter, steal nothing, and fatally shoot an unarmed woman? This was no random act of violence. It was unmistakably targeted. As the scene was scrutinized, suspicions mounted. This was not merely a robbery, it was something far more sinister. Michael stood devastated, his life fragmented, as the detectives conducted their investigation. The truth was gradually surfacing, though he was not yet ready to confront it. He couldn't bear it, not with Emma's lifeless form before him. But what he remained unaware of, what no one yet realized, was that the architect of his profound loss was closer than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation intensified, the real inquiries were just beginning to unfold. The initial shock of Emma's death yielded to an onslaught of questions. The detectives sensed a discrepancy. The crime scene was excessively pristine for what was purported to be a random robbery. As the investigation delved deeper, the evidence began to reveal its secrets. The bullet extracted from Emma's body was distinctive. It was the type issued to law enforcement. This crucial piece of evidence pivoted the focus of the inquiry. The suspect pool, once broad, now tightened to those within the police force, indicating a betrayal from within their own ranks. Michael, overwhelmed by his grief, was compelled to observe as the investigation shifted its scrutiny towards his colleague. Yet, in the solitude of his reflection, a nagging doubt took root. The guilt that had tormented him for weeks suddenly morphed into a horrifying realization. Michael began to recall the messages, the veiled threats, Jason's vehement declarations. "You'll regret choosing her over me." His hands shook as he remembered how Jason had started appearing uninvited, lingering near his home. The clues began to assemble into a scenario Michael had never allowed himself to consider. He could no longer contain it. Driven by a need for justice and truth, Michael took a drastic step. He approached his superiors, surrendered his badge and gun, and confessed to the affair. He disclosed everything about Jason. The fixation, the threats, the messages that depicted a man obsessed, unwilling to relinquish his hold at any cost. The focus of the investigation swiftly shifted towards Jason, and under the mounting pressure, his facade began to crumble. His alibi, previously solid, started to show cracks. Surveillance footage from nearby security cameras captured him near Michael's home on the night of the tragedy. The truth was gradually coming to light, and the net was tightening. Soon, Jason would have to confront the repercussions of his deeds. The arrest was swift. The evidence was incontrovertible. Ballistics, messages, and camera footage unequivocally implicated Jason. The investigation had meticulously assembled the truth, and it was undeniable. Jason had masterminded Emma's murder. He faced charges of first-degree murder, and escape from the legal repercussions was impossible. The trial commenced, filling the courtroom with palpable tension. The prosecution methodically laid out the case, exposing the clandestine affair between Jason and Michael, Jason's escalating obsession, and his deliberate scheme to eliminate Emma. They depicted Jason as a man overwhelmed by jealousy, prepared to commit any act to reclaim Michael, even murder. Then it was Michael's turn to testify. He stood before the jury, a man shattered by guilt, haunted by the affair that precipitated the catastrophe. His voice quivered as he detailed how his decisions had fractured his family, how he had been blind to the impending peril until it was irrevocably late. He talked about his deep affection for Emma, the remorse that now burdened him, and the anguish of losing her due to his misjudgments. The courtroom fell silent as Michael concluded, his statements resonating deeply. His testimony touched many, yet it could not alter the past, nor could it revive Emma. The verdict was predictable and justice was delivered. But for Michael, the true penalty was the awareness that his actions had directly led to this tragedy. Jason was found guilty of murder, his destiny sealed by the conclusive evidence. Although the court deemed justice served, for Michael, the punishment would endure indefinite. The guilt was overwhelming. His badge, once a symbol of pride, now symbolized the grave errors that had dismantled his family. Overcome by this burden, Michael resigned from the police force, unable to perpetuate in a role that constantly reminded him of the devastating consequences of his actions. The affair, the deceit, the betrayal, all had culminated in this profound loss, the loss of the woman he had once sworn to protect. In the end, deceit led to destruction. If only Michael had been truthful with himself, with Emma, and with those around him, perhaps this catastrophe could have been averted. But obsession, Jason's compulsion to dominate, Michael's inability to sever ties, had propelled them both to the edge, and the toll was exacted in blood. This narrative serves as a caution about the perils of concealed lives, the falsehoods we convince ourselves of, and those we tell our loved ones. Betrayal, once initiated, carries repercussions that extend far beyond what anyone might anticipate. Facing the truth may be harrowing, but ultimately, it is the only path to avert ruin. For when deceit intertwines with obsession, the cost is invariably exorbitant. Please subscribe to this channel and join us next time as we delve into the next chapter in the lives of those who thought they could mask the truth but fail. Wednesday morning, October 25, 2023, a tragedy unfolded in Dallas, Texas, when the lifeless body of a woman was found abandoned on the roadside. The victim had gunshot wounds on the chest, and it seemed she was shot on the scene the previous day. When the police arrived, they discovered that the body belonged to Dishai Stevenson, a 34-year-old businesswoman, wife, and mother. The previous night, she had been with her husband, Michael Smith, but by morning, she was on the roadside dead. The most unsettling part of the story is that Michael, her husband, was the last person to see her alive. This shocking turn of events would later be linked to mounting tension between the couple and the shocking discovery of the main reason an innocent woman was murdered. This is the tragic story of Dishai Stevenson, a woman whose life ended too soon. Before we go further into the events that transpired, we would like to offer our condolences to her loved ones, especially her teenage daughter, who must now face a life without her mother. Also, we would like to take this crime case as a close reminder to everyone to recognize warning signs in relationships. The story takes us to Dallas, Texas, a city situated in the southern United States, in North Texas. Unfortunately, it has a relatively high crime rate, with around 46 crimes per 1,000 residents, which is almost double the state average of around 27 crimes per 1,000 people. This could also be because Dallas is a very large city. Born on November 16, 1988, Dishai Stevenson was the epitome of a self-made woman. She had built a life for herself in Dallas, where she ran multiple successful businesses. Dishai had a boutique called Shea Money Purses and More LLC, where she sold a variety of fashion items like male and female clothing, purses, hats, lashes, and more. She also operated a tax preparation service, helping clients file tax refunds, which can be a good source of income in the United States. Dishai's drive for financial independence was very impressive, and she knew this. In fact, her Facebook nickname is listed as Money Mac Dishai, and on Instagram, it's Shea Money. Dishai was not shy to promote her business or tell the world that she was a thriving businesswoman. Because she was a hard worker, her businesses grew. She had just acquired a space in May 2022 that she had hoped would become her long-term shop. She thanked God for being able to get her store and was congratulated by friends. Dishai was also very close with her family and friends. She enjoyed cooking and having family gatherings. She wasn't just passionate about her business ventures. She also loved helping people, which made her loved by those who worked with and around her. She was generous with her time, love, and money, especially toward her family and friends. Now, let's talk about her personal life. Dishai's world revolved around her 16-year-old daughter, Maya, whom she showered with love and care. She was married to her husband, Michael, but Maya was from a former relationship. Dishai loved her husband, but she was also a doting mother who made sure her daughter had everything she needed, even giving her a new car for her 16th birthday, which was a symbol of her hard work and the life she could build. It was clear that family was important to Dishai because she also posted videos of her nieces, nephews, and even her goddaughter to wish them a happy birthday. She was also the primary caretaker for her mother, who had suffered a stroke and was left partially paralyzed. Balancing her entrepreneurial ventures with her caregiving responsibilities, Dishai's life was a constant juggle, but she did it with grace, always with a smile on her face. Despite her successful and demanding life, Dishai still found time to be a life-of-the-party type of person. She had a larger-than-life personality, always ensuring that everyone around her felt good. Even with all the good things happening in Dishai's life, her relationship with Michael Smith, her husband, would take a drastic turn. Michael Smith, 39 years old, had been a significant part of Dishai's life for years. To those looking in from the outside, he seemed quiet and easygoing, which appeared to be a fitting match for Dishai's energetic personality. They had been in a relationship for a long time, experiencing the usual ups and downs of couples. However, their relationship was more complex than it appeared on the surface. Dishai had maintained a long-distance relationship with Michael while he was incarcerated. Her loyalty to him never wavered during his time in prison, which began in 2016. Throughout his incarceration, she visited him, called him, and remained faithful, waiting for him to come home. This unwavering support was a testament to Dishai's loving and empathetic nature. When Michael was released from prison on May 17, 2021, Dishai wanted to ensure he felt appreciated and loved after missing out on so much. She planned a significant surprise for his return, a wedding. Just a week after his release, they tied the knot on May 24, 2021, at the courthouse. Later, on September 9, 2022, Dishai hosted an elaborate wedding celebration for them, taking care of everything from the rings to the entire ceremony. Given Michael's recent release from prison, Dishai became the sole financial provider in their relationship. Despite this potentially awkward situation, she didn't seem to mind. In an Instagram post, Dishai expressed her deep love for Michael, writing, "I already married the love of my life on May 24, 2021. I really prayed and cried out to God to send me somebody to love me for the real me. God sent me a king. My husband is so faithful to me. He's not running around making me look stupid. My husband is one of a kind. Good, bad, happy, or sad. That's my husband. I cry so much before. I never felt this kind of love before. It's scary because he treats me like a queen. He shows me what love really means. I married a man, not a little boy." Dishai's love for Michael was expressed in extraordinary ways. She supported him financially, emotionally, and in every aspect she could. To her, she had married a king who loved her and treated her like a queen. She lavished him with love, funding extravagant vacations and throwing lavish birthday parties where she gifted him expensive presents like a diamond ring and even $10,000 in cash. Dishai consistently went the extra mile for Michael, handling all financial and planning aspects of their life together.
Their marriage appeared to be a celebration of their bond, seemingly kept alive by Dishai's financial and emotional investments.
However, beneath this surface of apparent marital bliss, there were troubling signs that would later come to light. Michael's background starkly contrasted with Dishai's. Growing up in a challenging environment, he had to fend for himself from an early age. Unlike Dishai's supportive family dynamic, Michael's history was marred by drug abuse and a stint in prison, which put him significantly behind his peers in terms of financial stability and social status. As Dishai's businesses flourished and her reputation as a successful entrepreneur grew, Michael's resentment and jealousy intensified. This dynamic is not uncommon in relationships where there's a significant disparity in career success between partners. Men, in particular, may experience feelings of inadequacy, threats to their masculinity, and fears about changing relationship dynamics when their female partners outperform them professionally too. Traditional gender roles and societal expectations often exacerbate these feelings, leading men to question their value and role in the relationship. Research has shown that economic distress and perceived financial strain can significantly increase the risk of intimate partner violence too. In couples experiencing high levels of subjective financial strain, the likelihood of intimate partner violence rises to 9.5%, compared to 2.7% in couples with low levels of financial strain.
Who overthinks everything? Who showers less? Who is always eating? Who has a nicer butt? Who is more possessive? Who drools more? Who is a better driver?
Despite noticing subtle changes in the relationship, friends and family failed to grasp the full severity of the situation. Dishai, ever loyal, continued to lavish attention and gifts on Michael, buying matching clothes and covering all expenses in an attempt to show her love and support. However, Michael's jealousy extended beyond Dishai's professional success. He became increasingly possessive and controlling, a pattern that worsened as his drug addiction resurfaced. The once loving relationship became fraught with tension and red flags. More frequent arguments and fights began to take their toll on Dishai, the man she had sacrificed everything for. The one she believed would be her source of peace had transformed into someone unrecognizable. Tragically, this same person would ultimately become her murderer. On October 21, 2023, Dishai Stevenson called her sister Jasmine to wish Jasmine's son a happy birthday. During their conversation, Dishai made a chilling statement. "Sister, I feel like I'm going to die." Jasmine, taken aback, brushed it off at the time, not realizing the gravity of her sister's words. Deshae had promised to bring a gift for her nephew but never showed up.
She called me, she wished me happy birthday. He was like, normal, whatever. We was laughing, joking. And then she just said, sister, I feel like I'm finna die.
On October 24, 2023, Deshae's 16-year-old daughter became concerned when she couldn't reach her mother. This was highly unusual, as Deshae was known for always being in touch with her daughter and for her role as a caregiver to her partially paralyzed mother. The family's concern grew as they began searching for Deshae. When the family contacted Michael Smith, Deshae's husband, he denied knowing her whereabouts. They tracked Deshae's car to the Pleasant Village apartments, where Michael's father lived. Jasmine Stevenson and their cousin, Nita, noticed a large handprint on the driver's window of Deshae's car, raising suspicions. Shortly after, they learned from a community blog about a woman found shot to death nearby. Upon arriving at the scene, officers confirmed their worst fears. The police investigation quickly uncovered disturbing evidence. In Michael's car, they found red bodily fluids, a bullet casing, and a single sandal matching what Deshae had last been seen wearing. Surveillance footage showed both Deshae and Michael arriving separately at the apartment complex, with Deshae then getting into Michael's car. A disturbance was observed inside the vehicle. Deshae's body was discovered on the morning of October 25, 2023, on the side of a road in Dallas, Texas. She had been shot at close range in the chest. As news of Deshae's death spread, law enforcement launched a manhunt for Michael. They tracked him to his home, where they found multiple firearms, and later apprehended him at a nearby barbershop. Michael claimed he had been under the influence of PCP at the time of the shooting. Michael Smith, 39, was arrested and charged with murder. He remains in custody with a bond set at $1 million. The case is currently set for a jury trial, with Smith having been indicted by a grand jury for murder. This tragic event has left Deshae's family, especially her 16-year-old daughter, devastated and searching for answers. Jasmine Stevenson expressed the family's pain, asking, "Why would you take my sister from us?"
She did everything. My sister did everything for him. It was nothing he could ask her for. She did everything. She did everything in her power to show him that she...
The investigation into Deshae Stevenson's murder continues as authorities piece together the tragic final moments of her life. Michael Smith remains in custody, held on a $1 million bond. If he cannot pay this substantial amount, he will remain in jail until his court date is set and he is sentenced. Deshae's family is left heartbroken, struggling to comprehend the senseless violence that took their loved one. Her 16-year-old daughter, who shared a close bond with her mother, is especially devastated. Deshae had been a constant presence in her life, always ensuring she was cared for and loved. Now, the teenager must grapple with the loss of not only her mother but also the man who had been a part of their lives for years. Jasmine Stevenson, Deshae's sister, expressed the family's pain and confusion. She knew something was wrong when her niece called, as Deshae never left her daughter or partially paralyzed mother unattended. Jasmine voiced frustration over the red flags present in the relationship that weren't fully recognized in time to prevent the tragedy. She noted that Michael always appeared nice and friendly in front of the family, making his actions even more shocking. Why? Why would you take her away from us? She gave you everything, and you still took her life, Jasmine asked, heartbroken and enraged. Anita Stevenson, Deshae's cousin, revealed in an interview that just days before the incident, Deshae had spoken about wanting to save her marriage at all costs. This makes the story even more heart-wrenching, as the person responsible wasn't a stranger but her husband, the man she had supported through his incarceration and beyond. Court records show that authorities built their case based on surveillance footage and physical evidence from Michael's vehicle, including red bodily fluids, a bullet casing, and one of Deshae's sandals. Multiple firearms were also found during a search of his residence. The family is confident that the evidence is sufficient to secure a conviction. This tragic case highlights the complex dynamics of domestic violence, particularly in relationships where one partner feels overshadowed by the other's success. Michael's feelings of inadequacy, compounded by his substance abuse issues, likely contributed to the fatal confrontation. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships and the need for support systems for those experiencing domestic abuse. As Deshay's family mourned their devastating loss, they also called for justice. They grappled with haunting questions. Why had Michael committed this heinous act? What triggered such violence? And most crucially, how had they missed the warning signs that might have saved Deshay's life? Deshay's tragic death illuminates the broader issue of domestic violence. Michael's feelings of inadequacy, likely exacerbated by Deshay's financial success and independence, combined with his substance abuse issues, may have fueled his violent outburst. His inability to accept Deshay's achievements became a source of tension, ultimately leading to the fatal confrontation. This aligns with studies showing that men's economic frustration or inability to fulfill societal expectations of being the breadwinner can contribute to the perpetration of physical and sexual violence within the home. Domestic violence often goes unnoticed, especially when the signs are subtle. In Deshay's case, her love for Michael and her desire to support him may have blinded her to the dangerous undercurrents in their relationship. She believed that her loyalty, financial support, and devotion would be enough to keep the relationship stable. However, Michael's toxic behavior and substance abuse issues created a volatile situation. This case highlights the complex dynamics of power and control in abusive relationships. The National Council Against Domestic Violence notes that batterers often begin and continue their behavior because violence is an effective method for gaining and keeping control over another person. Michael's actions fit this pattern, using violence as a means to assert dominance over Deshay. As we reflect on this tragic case, it's important to consider the various factors that may have contributed to the violence. Was it Deshay's success that triggered Michael's actions? Was it primarily a financial issue, or were there deeper, ingrained patterns of aggression? These questions underscore the complexity of domestic violence situations and the need for comprehensive support and intervention strategies. By sharing Deshay's story, we hope to raise awareness about the warning signs of domestic violence and the importance of seeking help. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to local support services or national hotlines for assistance. Remember, no one deserves to live in fear or under the threat of violence. Thank you for watching this video and engaging with this important topic. Your thoughts and experiences shared in the comments below can help others learn and potentially recognize warning signs in their own relationships. Together, we can work towards breaking the cycle of domestic violence and creating safer communities for all.
Yo, somebody called the police, man. My sister just got shot in the head. Somebody came in the house and tried to take.
All right, we have units on the way, all right? And we're the medics as well.
Gardens of this East Memphis showpiece, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shatter the carefully constructed illusions of Magnolia Heights forever. Sarah Mitchell's Victorian mansion stood as a monument to perfection, every blade of grass measured, every window gleaming in the Tennessee sun. But perfection, as the residents of this exclusive suburb would soon learn, often comes at a devastating price. The thing about Sarah, Barbara Watson would later tell the grand jury, her hands trembling around a glass of water, was that she worked so hard to make everything look perfect. Maybe too hard. Sarah Mitchell hadn't always been the widow of Maple Drive. 8 months ago, she'd been Sarah Mitchell, wife of James Mitchell, one of Memphis's most successful real estate developers. At 42, she was what her friends called preserved, a woman who fought aging with the same determination she'd once used to climb the real estate rankings. Her chocolate brown hair was always freshly highlighted, her tennis skirts precisely the right length to suggest country club propriety while hinting at something more. The $2 million life insurance policy James left her meant she never had to work again. The 4-bedroom Victorian meant she had space to host the neighborhood's most coveted dinner parties. But money couldn't fill the silence in her king-sized bed, couldn't replace the sound of her husband's keys in the door every evening at 6. After James died, Something changed in her eyes. Lisa Anderson, her next-door neighbor, would observe during the investigation. Like she was hungry for something money couldn't buy. That hunger found its target in Kevin Anderson, Lisa's 17-year-old son. 6 feet 2 inches of junior Olympic swimming potential living just over the pristine hedge that separated their properties. Team captain with a 4.2 GPA and shoulders that made the mothers at Swim Meets Whisper behind their hands. The University of Texas had already dangled a full scholarship in front of him, contingent on his performance at the state championships. Kevin was different from the other boys, Coach Thompson would testify. More mature, maybe too mature for his own good. You see it sometimes with kids raised by single parents. They grow up too fast. Lisa Anderson had raised Kevin alone since his father disappeared with his secretary and most of their savings when Kevin was 5. Working double shifts in the Methodist Hospital ER, she'd somehow managed to get them into Magnolia Heights, determined to give her son the opportunities she never had. The swimming scholarship was supposed to be their ticket to something better. I should have seen it coming, Lisa would sob in the witness stand months later. The signs were all there. The new clothes he couldn't explain. The late-night texts. The way he started missing morning practice to help Mrs. Mitchell with the yard. What kind of yard work happens at 7 a.m.? James Mitchell's death had been sudden. A massive heart attack during his morning jog. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The health-conscious businessman who never smoked, never drank, dropped dead on the running trail he'd helped fund through his charitable foundation. He left behind not just a grieving widow, but a legacy of community involvement that made Sarah's position in neighborhood society untouchable. Or so everyone thought. Barbara Watson, a retired English teacher whose bay window offered a perfect view of the Mitchell property, kept a detailed diary of neighborhood activities, a habit she'd never broken since her teaching days. Her entries would later become crucial to Detective Michael Torres's investigation. The boy was over there all the time, she would tell him, flipping through pages of careful observations. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A teenager.
They'll say, well, Makila, you used to have a nonprofit, you used to have an event planning company, you owned a boutique. Hey, Felicia, how are you? Thank you for chiming in. I live on the edge too. Yep. So when I started, I've always written business plans for like my family and friends, but I didn't do it as a company. I was still trying to figure out what my niche was and what I wanted to do. And it was my husband that suggested I start a consulting company. And I'm like, we don't have any money for that. I'm trying to get the boutique off the ground. I was still doing event planning here and there. And I still had my nonprofit. Again, I'm pulled in so many different areas because I'm just trying to make ends meet and bring money in to help my husband pay the bills, because as well, it's not like it used to be in the past where men are the sole providers. Women get out there and hustle. They do the work and they kind of meet each other in the middle.
She always checking her phone. We all assumed she was dating again. We just never imagined. The stage was set. The players were in position. And in the stifling heat of a Memphis summer, behind the pristine facade of 1242 Maple Drive, a story of desire, desperation, and death was about to unfold that would leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their perfect neighborhood. Magnolia Heights wasn't just any Memphis suburb. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of old money and new ambitions. Streets named after flowers curved gracefully between homes that started at 7 figures, each one trying to outshine its neighbor while pretending not to try at all. The kind of neighborhood where gardeners arrived every Thursday at exactly 9 a.m. And deviation from this schedule was cause for urgent discussion at the Weekend Garden Club. The Mitchell house sat at the intersection of Maple Drive and Magnolia Circle, commanding attention from every angle. A 3-story Victorian painted in historical cream with hunter green trim. It boasted original stained glass windows that cast colorful shadows across the wraparound porch. The house had been James's wedding gift to Sarah, purchased when she was still a rising star at Memphis Elite Realty. The layout was like something from Architectural Digest, Detective Torres would note in his initial report. Main floor, formal living room, dining room, gourmet kitchen opening to a family room with French doors leading to the pool area. Second floor,
master suite, 3 bedrooms converted to a home office, library, and gym. 3rd floor, what Mrs. Mitchell called her private retreat, significant to the case's later developments. But it was the pool house that would become the focal point of the investigation. A recent addition James had completed just months before his death. It featured a changing area, full bathroom, and a small kitchenette. The perfect pool house for entertaining, Sarah had once boasted at a garden club meeting. She didn't know then how those words would come back to haunt her. The social hierarchy of Magnolia Heights operated on subtle but rigid rules. At the top sat the founding families, those who'd been there since the suburb's inception in the 1960s. The Mitchells, despite their wealth, were relatively new money, just 12 years in the neighborhood. But James's philanthropy and Sarah's social finesse had earned them acceptance among the elite. The Andersons, living in what was arguably the most modest home in Magnolia Heights, existed on the periphery of this social structure. Lisa's position as an ER nurse garnered respect, but her single mother status and mortgage struggles kept her from full acceptance into the inner circle. 8 months after James's death, the neighborhood was still adjusting to its new dynamic. Sarah's position had shifted, no longer half of Magnolia Heights' power couple, but not quite relegated to the ranks of the other widows who lived quietly with their memories and cats. She existed in a sort of social limbo, maintained by her wealth and her legendary dinner parties. The summer of 2018 pressed down on Memphis like a hot, wet blanket. Air conditioners hummed constantly, and the normally busy sidewalks emptied by 10 a.m. as residents retreated into their climate.
My wife was a good wife. She was a good mom. She was an entrepreneur. She came from nothing.
Like shadows lengthening across her perfect lawn. First, she missed a tennis match, a previously unthinkable occurrence. Then the Wednesday book club began meeting at Caroline Peterson's house instead of.
The yard work became a neighborhood talking point, though never directly addressed. Kevin would arrive early, often before the dew had dried on the grass. His sessions grew longer, more frequent. The lawn that only needed mowing once a week somehow required attention every other day. I saw him washing her car one morning, Barbara Watson noted in her journal. Shirtless, while she watched from the porch. In my day, we had more discretion. Lisa Anderson's concerns grew with each passing week. The scholarship offers that had once crowded their mailbox dwindled to a trickle. Kevin's times in the pool kept slipping, tenths of seconds adding up to missed opportunities. He was making money, Lisa would later tell the grand jury. Her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a double shift. But things weren't adding up. New clothes, an expensive watch, more than yard work should pay. When I asked, he said Mrs. Mitchell was generous with tips. Something in my gut told me there was more to it. The financial pressures in the Anderson household mounted. Lisa had taken out a second mortgage to keep them in Magnolia Heights, banking everything on Kevin's swimming scholarship. Each missed practice, each declined time, was another crack in their carefully planned future. Coach Thompson's concerns became more urgent. It wasn't just his times, he would testify. His focus was gone. He'd space out during team meetings, check his phone constantly. I caught him texting during practice, something the old Kevin would never have done. The whispers started at the country club, spread through tennis matches and garden club meetings. Sarah's behavior became a source of carefully worded concern. Her clothes got younger, tighter. The dinner parties that had once been elegant affairs became louder, lasted later. Looking back, Barbara Watson would later say, "We all saw what was happening. We just didn't want to believe it. Not in our neighborhood, not with our people, but in Magnolia Heights, where appearance was everything and secrets were currency. The truth was about to..."
Hello?
Thank you for calling Northwestern Mutual. This is Carrie. How can I help you? I understand you have some questions.
About the beneficiary information?
And you were the spouse, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm actually seeing on the application here that you were not listed as beneficiary.
Oh, wow. Is it the kid?
No, and unfortunately I can't disclose that. That's considered confidential, and I can only speak to the beneficiary on file.
Okay, I gotta figure out who is. Oh, wow. Dang, she didn't change it in time.
Girls. But until that morning, Sarah had maintained professional distance. I heard her crying before I saw her. Kevin's statement would read, "Not loud crying. That quiet kind that's somehow worse." She was standing there in a white tennis dress, holding a glass of lemonade, and just breaking. The security camera footage would later show Sarah's approach to the pool. 10:47 a.m., her steps unsteady, mascara slightly smeared. She stood watching Kevin work for 3 full minutes before speaking. "I miss him so much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone expects me to be over it by now. 8 months is enough grieving, they say. Back to tennis, back to book club, back to normal." She laughed bitterly. What's normal about sleeping alone in a bed meant for two? Kevin, unprepared for such raw emotion, did what he'd been raised to do. He listened. He set down the pool skimmer and faced her fully, offering the kind of attention that lonely people crave. She wasn't Mrs. Mitchell in that moment, he would later tell his lawyer. She was just Sarah, carrying proof of Crawford's previous victims. Security caught her meters from the bridal suite. Crawford pressed no charges. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. The wedding video, later reviewed by investigators, captured telling moments. Crawford's possessive grip during photos. Victoria's flinch when he touched her face. The best man's toast referencing Crawford's appreciation for youth. Most telling was the footage from unused angles. Victoria mouthing, "Help me," to a server. Crawford's whispered threats between poses, security guards blocking all exits. As the reception ended, Victoria stood on the grand staircase for the final photos. Her bouquet landed at Sophie's feet. She had sneaked back in wearing catering staff uniform. It was their last contact before the honeymoon. Inside the flowers, Sophie found a small note, USB in violin. "Show Blackwood everything." The newlyweds departed at midnight for the Maldives. Crawford, ever the showman, carried his bride to the waiting limousine. Guests cheered at the romantic gesture. None saw his fingers digging into her ribs or heard his whispered warning, "Remember our agreement." Accidents happen on honeymoons. Victoria Anderson became Victoria Crawford with a signature and a kiss. She entered a prison built of wealth and threats, sealed by vows and violence. Her wedding was a masterclass in manipulation, a $5 million facade hiding a transaction of power and control. But in her final act of defiance, she had planted the seeds of Crawford's destruction, evidence that would outlive her final days in paradise. Azure Dreams Resort welcomed the Crawfords on July 12, 2022. Villa 247, isolated on the resort's northern tip, became both paradise and prison. Security footage shows Victoria stumbling as they entered. Staff noted her dilated pupils, suggesting forced sedation during the flight. The abuse escalated immediately. Resort cameras captured Victoria running through the beach at 3 a.m. their first night. Crawford's security team intercepting her before she reached the main building. Guest services logged noise complaints from neighboring villas. Furniture being moved, the report stated. The next morning, Victoria appeared at breakfast wearing long sleeves despite the tropical heat. Her last successful contact with Sophie came through a borrowed phone from housekeeping. "He found something on my phone. Photos of documents from his office. He's been talking to someone about cleaning up loose ends. I think this is it. Sophie. If I don't." The call disconnected. The housekeeper was relocated to another property that afternoon. July 14th brought the final pieces into place. Crawford held meetings with unknown visitors in his villa. Staff reported deliveries of unusual supplies, industrial cleaning materials, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, diving equipment. Victoria made 4 attempts to use the resort's business center computer. Each time, security arrived within minutes to escort her back. Hotel staff documented increasing concerns. Head chef Marco Rossi reported Victoria's hands shaking too badly to hold her fork at dinner. Spa therapist Amy Chen noted, severe bruising inconsistent with normal activities. Beach attendant Raj Patel observed Crawford's aggressive handling of Victoria during a supposedly romantic sunset walk. The last verified sighting came at 7:43 p.m. on July 15th. Security footage shows Victoria entering the beachfront restaurant alone, a rare moment without Crawford's surveillance. She borrowed waitress Amora Rashid's phone, made a brief call later traced to a burner phone in Sophie's possession. Her final words recorded, "He knows about the files. All of it. The girls, the islands, everything. I hid." The call cut off. Crawford reported her missing 36 hours later. His timeline claimed she went for a midnight swim. Resort logs show different activity. 8:15 p.m., Crawford meets two unidentified men at villa. 9:30 p.m., security cameras on North Beach malfunction. 10:45 p.m., unusual boat activity near villa's private dock. 11:50 p.m., power fluctuation in Villa 247. 2:30 a.m., Crawford's security team loads heavy bags into boat. 4:15 a.m., cleaning crew requested for villa. 5 a.m., Crawford. Lisa would later sob to Detective Torres. "A mother knows. God help me. I knew something was wrong. I just never imagined, never thought." By early August, the situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sarah had stopped attending book club entirely. Kevin's scholarship offers sat unopened in the mail. They were lost in their own world, blind to the growing suspicions around them. Barbara Watson's final journal entry before the incident would prove prophetic. "Watched Sarah and the Anderson boy by the pool today. There's something dangerous in the way they look at each other. In my 30 years of teaching, I've seen that look before. It never ends well. The fuse was lit. The only question was who would be caught in the explosion." Rachel Martinez couldn't pinpoint the exact moment her perfect life began to unravel, but she could trace the threads of her story back to where they first intertwined with Miguel's, that fateful property showing in the summer of 2015. Standing in her home office in the Horizon Tower, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's betrayal, she found herself replaying those early memories with newfound clarity. Born to academic parents in Santa Monica in 1990, Rachel had grown up with an almost obsessive attention to detail, a trait inherited from her mathematician father that would later prove both a blessing and a curse. Her childhood home had been a haven of logical thinking and emotional intelligence, with her mother's psychology practice providing a constant backdrop of human behavioral analysis. These influences shaped her into someone who could read both spreadsheets and people with equal precision. Her path to real estate hadn't been direct. After graduating from UCLA with honors in business administration, she had dabbled in investment banking, but found the work unfulfilling. It was during her first serious relationship, a 2-year engagement that ended with her fiancé's infidelity, that she discovered her talent for property. The process of finding her own place after the breakup had been therapeutic, and her analytical mind found satisfaction in the complex dynamics of real estate transactions. By 2015, at age 25, Rachel had established herself as one of Los Angeles' rising stars in luxury real estate. She had also built careful walls around her heart, the betrayal of her past relationship leaving her with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a carefully maintained set of defenses. Then Miguel Martinez walked into her life, and those defenses crumbled like sand castles in the tide. The property showing was for a $12 million beachfront estate in Malibu. Miguel arrived 15 minutes early, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of success without trying too hard. His smile lit up the marble foyer as he introduced himself, and Rachel felt an immediate spark of connection that both thrilled and terrified her. "I apologize for my early arrival," he had said, his slight accent adding charm to his words. "I find that punctuality is a poor substitute for eagerness." The line should have been cheesy, but delivered with his warm brown eyes fixed on hers, it felt like poetry. What followed was the stuff of local legend in their social circle. Their 3-hour property tour turned into dinner, which became a weekend of intense conversation and undeniable chemistry. Miguel pursued Rachel with a single-minded focus that swept away her reservations. Every detail was perfect. Flowers delivered to her office, surprise lunch dates, handwritten notes left on her car. He seemed to anticipate her every need, creating a courtship that felt like a fairy tale. Looking back, Rachel could now see how Miguel had perfectly crafted his approach. He had studied her, understanding that her analytical mind needed logical progression while her wounded heart craved romantic gestures. He built their relationship like one of his construction projects, with careful planning and flawless execution. Miguel's own story, as he told it then, seemed equally perfect. Born in Mexico City in 1988, he had come to the United States at age 10 when his father's construction business expanded northward. He had worked his way up from job sites to project management, eventually starting his own company. His success was self-made, his ambitions seemingly matched only by his devotion to Rachel. What Rachel didn't know then, what she would only discover years later through painstaking investigation, was that Miguel's charm had left a trail of broken hearts across Los Angeles' professional landscape. His construction company had provided the perfect cover for a pattern of seduction and manipulation that spanned years. Female clients, architects, and project managers had all fallen victim to his carefully orchestrated romances. Their whirlwind courtship culminated in a proposal after just 6 months. Miguel arranged a private sunset dinner on the rooftop of what would become their home, the exclusive Horizon Tower. He had supposedly just completed the building's construction, though Rachel would later learn this too was part of his elaborate web of deception. The proposal was witnessed by a random photographer who happened to capture the moment perfectly, and their engagement appeared in several local magazines. Rachel threw herself into their relationship with the same intensity she brought to her career. She scaled back her working hours, turned down opportunities for expansion, and focused on creating their perfect home. Her friends warned her she was moving too fast, but she dismissed their concerns. After all, she was the one who understood numbers, patterns, and probability. She had built a life centered around her children, working hard to create a stable, loving home in their quiet Minnesota community. Those who knew Victoria best said she approached motherhood with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything in life. Her boys were her world, and she had carefully chosen the Riverside Apartments complex for its safe neighborhood and proximity to their school. Every morning, she would wait early to make their breakfast, never missing a school event or sports game. The thought that she would miss her birthday breakfast with them was unthinkable to those who knew her dedication as a mother. Victoria always saw the good in everyone. Her sister would later write in a heartbreaking social media post, "That's who she was, someone who believed in giving people a chance, in the basic goodness of others." This trusting nature, a quality that made her so beloved in her community, would ultimately be exploited by the man who took her life. The day before her murder, Victoria had been excitedly planning her 39th birthday celebration with her sons. She had promised them a special breakfast the next morning, followed by a day at their favorite park. Her last text to her best friend read, "Can't wait for tomorrow, another year older, but grateful for every moment with my boys." Those words would later be read at her memorial service, a testament to the devoted mother whose life was cut tragically short. Victoria's apartment reflected her personality, warm, welcoming, and filled with photos of her children. On her refrigerator, investigators found a calendar marked with her son's activities, upcoming school events, and her own birthday circled in bright red marker. The morning she was killed, she had planned to open birthday cards her boys had carefully hidden in the kitchen cabinet the night before. What made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was how hard Victoria had worked to create a safe, stable life. She was known for being cautious, especially when it came to her children's safety. Her decision to trust Christopher Neal that night seemed out of character to those who knew her best, but friends later recalled how he had cleverly used their shared hometown connection to lower her guard. She probably felt safe because he knew all the same places, all the same people. One friend noted, he used that familiarity to make her feel comfortable. The investigation would reveal that Victoria had spent that final evening at a bar she knew well, surrounded by familiar faces. She wasn't the type to go home with strangers, but Neal had spent hours gaining her confidence, playing on their shared background and appearing harmless. Security footage showed him acting charming and friendly, giving no indication of the violence that would follow. August 11, 2024, started as a typical summer evening in Sauk Rapids. Victoria had decided to stop by Murphy's Bar,
a local establishment she frequently visited with friends for a quiet drink before her birthday. The security footage from that night would later become crucial evidence, capturing every moment of her fateful encounter with Christopher Neal. At 11:47 p.m., cameras showed Victoria entering the bar wearing a blue summer dress, her favorite silver necklace catching the light. She chose a seat at the corner of the bar, ordering what would be her first and only drink of the night. It was around midnight when Christopher Neal first approached her. The security footage showed him deliberately choosing the seat next to her, despite several empty spaces at the bar. What initially seemed like a chance encounter would later reveal itself as something more calculated. Neal, as captured on the bar's cameras, spent the next hour engaging Victoria in conversation. He mentioned knowing her hometown, dropping names of places and people she knew. With each shared connection, Victoria's natural wariness seemed to fade. The footage showed her becoming more animated, laughing at his stories, her guard lowering with each passing minute. He seemed so normal, so familiar. The bartender would later tell investigators. They looked like old friends catching up, but Neal was far from the harmless figure he portrayed. Just 9 days earlier, he had been released on bail for a violent strangulation attack, a fact Victoria had no way of knowing as she sat beside him. At 1 a.m., the cameras captured what would be Victoria's final moments in public. Neal had offered to drive her home, citing concerns about her safety. The bitter irony of this gesture wouldn't be lost on investigators. Victoria was seen gathering her purse, her car keys glinting in her hand as she led the way to her black Chevy Equinox. The drive to Riverside Apartments took only 5 minutes. Security cameras in the parking lot recorded their arrival at 1:05 a.m. Victoria appeared relaxed, laughing at something Neal said as they walked toward the building's entrance. She used her key fob to let them in, the door closing behind them at 1:07 a.m. It would be the last time Victoria was seen alive. What transpired in the next 2 hours would only be pieced together through forensic evidence and the signs of struggle left behind. The layout of Victoria's apartment suggested she had initially invited Neal in willingly, perhaps for coffee or conversation.
2 cups were found on the kitchen counter, one with traces of lipstick matching Victoria's shade, the other untouched. The violence appeared to have erupted suddenly. Evidence indicated that Victoria had fought desperately for her life. Her broken nails, the overturned furniture, and the scattered contents of her purse painted a picture of a terrifying struggle. The medical examiner would later determine that the attack lasted several minutes, with Victoria conscious and fighting throughout most of it. At precisely 3 a.m., security cameras captured Neal leaving the building alone. His earlier friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by furtive glances and attempts to hide his face. He carried Victoria's car keys, which investigators noted had been in her purse, not on the counter as he would later claim. The footage showed him getting into Victoria's Equinox and driving away, leaving her lying lifeless in the apartment where she had built a home for her children. The investigation into Victoria's murder shifted into high gear once detectives realized they weren't just dealing with a random act of violence, but potentially the work of a serial offender. The crime scene at Riverside Apartments became a focal point of forensic activity, with investigators meticulously documenting every detail of the tragic final moments of Victoria's life. The medical examiner's findings painted a horrific picture of Victoria's final struggle. The bruising patterns on her neck told a story that contradicted Neal's claims of innocence. These weren't the marks of a brief encounter, noted the lead forensic investigator. The injuries showed sustained pressure, applied with practiced precision. Most disturbing was the similarity to the injuries reported in Neal's previous assault case, a pattern that suggested not just violence, but a signature method of attack. DNA evidence would prove crucial to the investigation. Swabs taken from Victoria's neck revealed genetic material from 2 sources. Neal's DNA emerged as the dominant profile, particularly concentrated in areas showing the worst bruising. A second, weaker DNA profile was also detected, but investigators quickly determined this likely came from casual contact earlier in the day, perhaps from one of her children or a friend. Victoria's apartment, typically kept immaculate for her children, had become a map of her final fight for life. A broken lamp in the living room suggested where the attack began. Scattered cushions and an overturned coffee table traced her desperate attempt to escape. Most telling was her bedroom, where investigators found her phone still plugged into its charger. She never had a chance to call for help. The evidence trail extended beyond the apartment. Security footage from neighboring buildings captured Neal's exit from the complex in Victoria's car. Traffic cameras tracked the black Chevy Equinox heading south on Highway 10, then merging onto Interstate 35. Each ping from Victoria's stolen cell phone helped investigators track Neil's flight to Louisiana, where he apparently believed he could evade detection. When authorities finally caught up with Neil at a motel just outside New Orleans, they found more damning evidence. Victoria's car keys were in his pocket, her credit cards in his wallet. Her phone had been wiped clean and abandoned in a dumpster 3 states away. These weren't the actions of someone who, as Neil claimed, had left a woman alive and well in her apartment. Most incriminating was Neil's behavior during questioning. His claim of limited memory about the events in Victoria's apartment stood in stark contrast to his precise recall of their earlier conversation at the bar. He remembered details about their shared hometown but claimed to forget her name. When shown photos of Victoria's apartment, he recognized where he had been but insisted he couldn't remember what had happened there. The autopsy results delivered the final pieces of evidence needed to build a solid case. Victoria had died between 2:30 and 3 a.m., exactly the time frame when Neil was still in her apartment. The cause of death was manual strangulation, with defensive wounds on her hands and arms showing she had fought desperately until her last breath. Most chillingly, the method of strangulation matched exactly the technique described by Neil's previous victim, a woman who had survived to tell her story just 9 days earlier. Christopher Neil's path to becoming Victoria's alleged killer didn't begin the night they met at Murphy's bar. As investigators dug deeper into his past, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of escalating violence that painted a picture of a predator growing increasingly bold and dangerous with each passing year. Just 9 days before Victoria's murder, on August 1, 2024, Neil had faced charges for a strikingly similar attack. In that case, he had allegedly strangled a woman he was dating in Akin County. The victim survived to tell a haunting story that would later mirror Victoria's final moments. He seemed so normal at first, she had told police. Then something changed in his eyes, and his hands were around my throat. Despite the severity of this attack, Neil was released on bail on August 3rd, given a no-contact order, and walked free. But this wasn't just about 2 isolated incidents. As investigators pieced together Neil's history, they found a trail of police reports, restraining orders, and domestic disturbance calls stretching back years. Women in different counties had reported similar encounters, charm turning to violence, with strangulation being his weapon of choice. Most cases had been handled as routine domestic disputes, the pattern going unnoticed until it was too late. The evolution of Neil's violence was particularly chilling. He had started with domestic incidents, attacking women who knew him. Victoria represented a deadly escalation, the first time he had allegedly targeted a stranger. The shift from domestic violence to attacking someone he had just met showed a predator growing more confident, more brazen in his choices of victims. His method of approaching victims revealed careful calculation. With Victoria, he had used their shared hometown connection to gain trust. Security footage from Murphy's bar showed him watching her for nearly an hour before making his move, waiting until she was alone before approaching. This wasn't opportunistic violence. It was practiced, planned predation. Even more disturbing was Neil's behavior after each attack. In previous cases, he had shown a pattern of minimizing his actions, claiming memory loss, or insisting the women had exaggerated their injuries. With Victoria's case, he followed the same playbook, admitting to being in her apartment but claiming no memory of the violence, despite the clear evidence of his deliberate actions afterward. The violation of his no-contact order from the August 1st case revealed another aspect of Neil's personality, a complete disregard for legal restrictions. On the very day Victoria's body was discovered, August 12th, the Akin County Sheriff's Office was already processing paperwork for his violation of the order. He had allegedly attempted to contact his previous victim, showing a pattern of continued harassment that would only end with his arrest for Victoria's murder. What made Neil particularly dangerous was his ability to appear harmless. Bar patrons who saw him with Victoria described him as charming, well-spoken, and completely normal. This facade of normality allowed him to move through society virtually undetected, making him the kind of predator that law enforcement finds most challenging to stop before tragedy strikes. The manhunt for Christopher Neil ended at the Red Pine Motel, a rundown establishment just outside New Orleans, Louisiana. After nearly a week of tracking cell phone signals and following Victoria's stolen credit card transactions, authorities finally closed in on August 18, 2024. They found Victoria's black Chevy Equinox parked outside room 114, its Minnesota plates covered with mud in an apparent attempt to avoid detection. The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Neil surrendered without resistance when federal marshals and local police breached his room at 6:15 a.m. He was found fully dressed, lying on top of the bed covers, as if he had been expecting them. In his possession were Victoria's car keys, credit cards, and apartment key fob, items he had taken from her purse after allegedly taking her life. What struck investigators was Neil's demeanor during arrest. He showed no emotion, no signs of distress or surprise. When informed he was being charged with Victoria's murder, he reportedly just nodded and said, "I want a lawyer." This cold composure contrasted sharply with the violent struggle evidenced in Victoria's apartment just days before. The charges against Neil began to stack up quickly. In Benton County, where Victoria's murder occurred, prosecutors filed second-degree murder charges. The criminal complaint detailed the brutality of the attack, citing the medical examiner's findings of severe neck trauma and defensive wounds. The DNA evidence, security footage, and Neil's flight to Louisiana were listed as key elements supporting the murder charge. But Neil's legal troubles extended beyond Victoria's case. In Akin County, he still faced charges for the August 1st strangulation attack. The violation of his no-contact order from that case added another charge. Prosecutors in both counties began coordinating their efforts, building a case that would show Neil's pattern of escalating violence. During his first court appearance in Benton County, Neil maintained his story of limited memory about the night of Victoria's death. Through his court-appointed attorney, he entered a not guilty plea. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They described a calculated predator who had watched Victoria at the bar, gained her trust through manipulation, and then killed her in her own home. The bail hearing revealed the full extent of the prosecution's concerns about Neil's danger to society. They presented evidence of his previous strangulation attack, the violated no-contact order, and his attempt to flee the state. The judge, noting the escalating pattern of violence and flight risk, ordered Neil held without bail, a decision that brought visible relief to Victoria's family in the courtroom. As Neil was led away in shackles, attention turned to the broader implications of his case. Questions arose about how he had been free to allegedly kill Victoria despite the recent strangulation charge. The prosecutor's office faced scrutiny over their handling of his previous case, where he had been released on bail despite showing clear signs of being a danger to women. In the quiet Minnesota town of Sauk Rapids, the impact of Victoria's murder rippled through the community like shockwaves. Her two young boys, who had waited eagerly for their mother to join them for birthday breakfast that August morning, now faced a future without her guidance, love, and ever-present smile. Their lives, once filled with the routine of school days and their mother's constant presence, had been shattered by one night of senseless violence. Victoria's family launched a GoFundMe page, not just to cover funeral expenses, but to create a trust fund for her son's future. The page became a testament to who Victoria was, filled with stories from those who knew her. She was more than just a victim, wrote her sister. Victoria was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it. She taught her boys to be kind, to be strong, and to always help others. Now we have to help them carry on without her. The local community's response was overwhelming. Murphy's Bar, where Victoria spent her final hours, hosted a fundraiser for her children. Regular patrons shared stories of her infectious laugh, her proud conversations about her boys' achievements, and her bubbly personality that could brighten even the darkest days. She wasn't just another customer, the bartender recalled. Victoria was family to everyone who knew her, but beneath the outpouring of support ran an undercurrent of anger and frustration. Victoria's death had exposed critical failures in a system designed to protect vulnerable individuals. Her family spoke out publicly about these systemic gaps. 9 days, her brother said during a community meeting, just 9 days between Neil's release and Victoria's death. The system had him in custody, knew he was dangerous, and still let him walk free. The impact of Victoria's death extended beyond her immediate circle. Local domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls for help, with many women citing her story as their wake-up call. The Sauk Rapids Police Department began reviewing its protocols for handling strangulation cases, acknowledging that these incidents often precede more serious violence. In a cruel twist of fate, Victoria's birthday, August 12th, now marks both her death and her legacy. Her family has established the Victoria Gamble Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence and advocating for stricter bail conditions in strangulation cases. "We couldn't save Victoria," her mother said at the foundation's launch, but maybe we can save someone else's daughter, someone else's mother. As Christopher Neal awaits trial in Benton County, Victoria's story continues to resonate. Her death has become a catalyst for change, prompting discussions about how the justice system handles violent offenders and the need for better protection for potential victims. But for those who loved her, Victoria was more than a cautionary tale or a statistic. She was a mother who lived for her children, a friend who never failed to lift others up, and a woman whose trust in others ultimately cost her everything. Today, Victoria's apartment at Riverside remains empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that unfolded there. Her black Chevy Equinox, recovered from Louisiana, sits in an evidence lot, but her spirit lives on through her sons, through the foundation bearing her name, and through the changes her death has inspired in her community. While it's too late for Victoria, her story serves as both a warning and a call to action, a reminder that patterns of violence, left unchecked, can escalate with devastating consequences.
Fourteen-year-old Aliana DeFries was on her way to school when Christopher Whitaker kidnapped her and killed her inside an abandoned home.
Stephanie, Gabe, right now there was a break in testimony as Christopher Whitaker's attorneys today tried to spare his life.
People going to look at me like a monster. The words hung heavy in the dimly interrogation room of Cleveland Police Department. Christopher Whitaker, a 44-year-old with haunted eyes, continued his confession. I'm not a monster. I'm just an addict. But monsters rarely recognize their own reflection. On January 26, 2017, as Cleveland stirred awake under a gray winter sky, 14-year-old Aliana DeFries hugged her mother goodbye at a bus stop near East 149th Street. The city was just beginning its morning routine, commuters clutching coffee cups, buses groaning along their routes, and abandoned buildings standing silent witness to the city's decline. No one noticed the man who had been pacing the streets since dawn, waiting. Aliana never made it to school that day. But for 9 crucial hours, no one knew she was missing. The school never called. Her empty desk sat untouched. While her parents went about their day, believing their daughter was safe in class, Aliana was being led down Fuller Avenue toward one of Cleveland's 5,000 abandoned homes, buildings that had long since surrendered to decay and darkness. 3 days later, when police finally pushed open the door of 9412 Fuller Avenue, they would discover just how deeply that darkness ran. The scene inside would not only change a family forever, but would expose a broken system that had failed on multiple levels, a city's struggle with abandoned properties, a school's fatal oversight, and the devastating consequences of letting a predator roam free. This is the story of Aliana DeFries, a purple-loving, doll-playing teenager who should have been safe on her way to school. It's a story about a city's dark corners, a family's worst nightmare, and a killer who blamed drugs for his depravity. But most importantly, it's a story about change, the kind that only comes after tragedy forces us to confront our failures. Welcome to Cleveland, 2017, a city of abandoned dreams, where one morning bus ride would expose the cracks in a system that should have protected its most vulnerable. This is the last bus stop, Cleveland, Ohio, a city that once pulsed with the rhythms of American industry and progress. In the early 1900s, it stood proudly as America's 6th largest city, its skyline growing taller with each passing decade. The streets hummed with the promise of prosperity as automotive giants like Peerless, Chandler, and Winton made their home here. Between the 1930s and 1950s, the population swelled past 1 million, a testament to the American dream made real in steel and concrete. But by 2017, that dream had long since crumbled. Walk down any street in Cleveland's outer neighborhoods, and you'd find the ghostly remains of that golden age. Where factory workers once rushed to morning shifts, abandoned homes now stood like rotting teeth in the city's smile. More than 5,000 vacant properties dotted the urban landscape, each one a potential crime scene waiting to happen. These weren't just empty buildings, they were monuments to decay, their boarded windows and sagging porches telling stories of economic collapse and urban flight. The decline had been brutal and systematic. When the manufacturing industry restructured in the 1960s, it pulled jobs away like a receding tide. The great industrial machine that had built Cleveland began to rust. Housing discrimination and redlining carved up neighborhoods like surgical incisions, leaving some areas to bleed out slowly. Violence followed poverty like a shadow, and by 2010, Cleveland's population had shrunk to just one-third of its peak. This was the Cleveland that Eliana DeFries knew, a city struggling to hold onto its dignity while fighting battles on multiple fronts. In some neighborhoods, these abandoned homes clustered together like dark archipelagos. Local residents would hurry past them, especially after dark. They knew what happened in these modern ruins: drug deals, assaults, or worse. Police reports painted a grim picture. These weren't just eyesores, they were predators' lairs. For city officials, the problem seemed insurmountable. Every boarded-up window was a reminder of failed policies and limited resources. The city had managed to reduce the number of abandoned properties from 12,000 to around 5,000 by 2017, but for residents living next door to these hollow structures, even one was too many. Each vacant house was a potential crime scene, a place where screams could be swallowed by empty rooms and darkness could hide unspeakable acts. This was the backdrop against which our story unfolds, a once proud city where abandoned dreams created perfect hiding places for nightmares. And on that January morning in 2017, one of these neglected properties would become more than just another statistic in Cleveland's struggle. It would become the scene of a tragedy that would force an entire city to confront its demons, both architectural and human. In this landscape of urban decay, 14-year-old Eliana DeFries was about to board a bus, unaware that one of Cleveland's countless abandoned homes was waiting to claim its most innocent victim yet. Born on June 12, 2002, in Detroit, Eliana DeFries entered the world as summer was painting the Great Lakes region in vibrant colors. Her parents, Dunshaw Cooper and Damon DeFries, were young and hopeful, dreaming of better opportunities for their newborn daughter. While Eliana was still an infant, they made the decision to cross Lake Erie's waters to Cleveland, believing the move would forge a brighter future for their family. Though her parents' relationship didn't endure, their dedication to their daughter never wavered. Living primarily with her mother, Eliana's world was carefully crafted by two parents who, despite their separation, remained united in their love for her. Damon, her father, never became a weekend warrior or distant figure. Instead, he wove himself into the fabric of her daily life, driving her to school, planning weekend adventures, and serving as the moral compass every young girl needs. Eliana bloomed into what her mother fondly called a girly girl. Purple wasn't just her favorite color, it was her signature. Even as she entered her teenage years, she held onto a pure-hearted joy that made her special. Baby dolls still lined her shelves, treasured companions that spoke to her gentle nature. Around the house, she was her mother's eager helper, approaching household chores with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else in life. But life wasn't without its challenges. At East Prep and Village Prep Woodland Hills, teachers noticed that Eliana sometimes struggled with her schoolwork. The school suspected a disability, but this revelation never dimmed Eliana's spirit. If anything, it made her work harder. She attended early morning tutoring sessions, determined to keep pace with her classmates. Her disability wasn't a wall, it was simply another part of who she was. The arrival of a younger half-brother added new colors to Eliana's world. She embraced her role as big sister with characteristic warmth, her natural nurturing instincts shining through. Family members would later recall how she doted on him, how her face would light up when he entered the room. Her parents' protective instincts ran deep, perhaps deeper because of her learning challenges. For 14 years, they had carefully orchestrated her movements, ensuring their daughter's safety in a city they knew could be unforgiving. The decision to let her take the bus alone was not made lightly, but the bus stop's location, right in front of a police station, seemed to promise safety. The school's assurance that they would call if she ever failed to arrive provided an additional security blanket. By January 2017, Eliana had settled into a comfortable routine. Each morning, she would don her school uniform, tan pants and a white shirt, and set off for her early tutoring session. She was responsible, reliable, and trusted. Her mother would later say that Eliana never gave them any reason to worry. At 14, Eliana DeFries stood on the cusp of something greater. She was that rare teenager who retained her childhood wonder while beginning to glimpse her adult potential. No one could have known that the careful scaffolding of protection built around her was about to encounter a threat that no one had anticipated. In the end, what made Eliana special, her trusting nature, her innocent heart, her determination to succeed, would also make her vulnerable to a predator who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting in the shadows of Cleveland's abandoned landscape. January 26, 2017, began like any other winter morning in Cleveland. The sky was still ink dark, the air crisp with winter's bite, as Dunshaw Cooper helped her daughter prepare for school. It was 6:30 a.m., and Eliana had an early tutoring session at 7 a.m., a testament to her determination to overcome her academic challenges. The morning routine was familiar, almost ritualistic. Aliona pulled on her school uniform, tan pants and a crisp white shirt, while her mother checked her backpack one last time. Purple folders, neatly organized notebooks, and carefully completed homework were all in place. There was nothing to suggest this morning would be different from the hundreds that had come before. At 6:45 a.m., mother and daughter walked together to the bus stop on East 149th Street, just north of Kinsman Avenue. The police station loomed nearby, its presence a silent guardian that had always provided comfort to Dunshaw. Steam rose from their breath in the cold morning air as they waited for the bus. When it arrived, Dunshaw watched her daughter board, just as she had done countless times before. She waited until the bus pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the grey morning, carrying her daughter toward what should have been just another school day. The bus's surveillance camera would later reveal Aliona's journey to her transfer point at East 93rd and Kinsman Avenue. She sat quietly, perhaps reviewing her tutoring materials or simply watching the city wake up outside the window. The footage shows her departing the bus at her usual stop, crossing the street with the careful attention her parents had instilled in her. But what happened next would haunt Cleveland for years to come. Meanwhile, life continued its normal rhythm at home. Dunshaw went about her day, secure in the knowledge that her daughter was safe in school. She and her mother had already made plans for dinner that evening. Crawford offered her a promotion, then private training at his island resort. She vanished during the trip. Police found no evidence of foul play. Her family received a generous settlement and a confidentiality agreement. Maria Santos came next. 20 years old, working as a housekeeper in his Miami property. Crawford married her in a private ceremony. 6 months later, her body washed up on a private beach. The death was ruled accidental drowning. The investigator who questioned this conclusion lost his job after allegations of misconduct. His replacement closed the case within days. Ashley Porter knew too much. At 18, she worked in customer service at Crawford's Las Vegas hotel. She discovered financial irregularities, offshore accounts moving millions through shell companies. She threatened to expose him. A week later, security cameras caught her jumping from her apartment balcony. The suicide note, perfectly typed, mentioned depression. Her laptop vanished. The pattern emerged slowly. Young women from struggling families, jobs at Crawford Properties, sudden promotions, private trips to isolated locations. Then silence. Some vanished completely. Others had accidents. A few signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements, relocated to distant countries with generous monthly payments. Crawford's network ran deep. Security Chief Marcus Chen coordinated surveillance and cleanup operations. Financial advisor Robert Walsh handled payoffs and evidence purchases. Hotel managers identified potential targets. Doctors provided false medical reports. Police chiefs buried investigations. Politicians blocked inquiries. The private islands served multiple purposes. Officially, they were exclusive resorts for wealthy clients. In reality, they housed Crawford's darker operations. Underground rooms with surveillance equipment, medical facilities for emergencies, boats ready to move people or evidence. Staff paid triple normal wages for absolute loyalty. Crawford collected leverage like others collected art. Every employee, every ally, every silent partner had secrets he kept. Photos, videos, financial records, insurance against betrayal. Those who cooperated received bonuses. Those who resisted disappeared. His previous wives followed a pattern. Diana Crawford, 1998 to 2000, died in a car accident after filing for divorce. Elizabeth Crawford, 2001 to 2004, overdosed in a hotel room when she threatened to talk. Sarah Crawford, 2005 to 2007, simply vanished during a Caribbean cruise. Rachel Crawford, 2008 to 2010, lives in Switzerland, receiving monthly payments for her silence. Michelle Crawford, 2011 to 2015, survived a home invasion that left her unwilling to testify about anything. The operation moved with terrifying efficiency. Target identification, background research, financial pressure on families, job offers, isolation from support networks, documentation of compromising situations, marriage if necessary, elimination if required. Crawford maintained multiple identities, passports under different names, bank accounts in tax havens, properties owned through layers of corporations. Each hotel contained secure floors accessible only with special keys. Staff learned quickly: see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. His private security force rivaled small armies. Ex-military personnel, former intelligence operators, everyone vetted, paid well, and compromised. They monitored communications, followed family members, erased evidence. No detail was too small to control. The corruption extended to highest levels. Judges who blocked investigations, prosecutors who lost evidence, journalists who killed stories, politicians who changed laws. Crawford didn't just buy silence, he bought systems. By 2022, when Victoria Anderson caught his eye, Crawford's operation was almost perfect. Almost. He didn't count on Sophie Anderson's determination, didn't expect Detective Blackwood's persistence, didn't realize his own arrogance would finally break the pattern. Victoria represented something new, a witness who left evidence, a victim who planned ahead. As winter winds howled through Cleveland streets, 3 police officers approached 9412 Fuller Avenue. The search warrant, finally in hand, felt heavy with foreboding. The abandoned house loomed before them, its windows boarded, its structure decaying, one of thousands of similar properties that dotted Cleveland's landscape. But this one was different. This one held secrets. The rear door stood ajar, as if violently forced open at some point. The officers drew their flashlights. No electricity ran through the building's corroded wiring, and stepped inside. Immediately, a metallic smell hit them, one every experienced officer knows: blood. At their feet, a crimson trail began in what appeared to be the dining room. Like a macabre guide, it led them deeper into the house's dark interior, disappearing beneath a closed door. The officers exchanged glances, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. When they pushed the door open, their worst fears were confirmed. There, crumpled on the floor in a pool of her own blood, lay Eliana DeFries. She was wearing only socks. Her school uniform, the tan pants and white shirt she'd put on with such care just days before, lay discarded nearby, stained red. Her backpack, still packed for a school day that never came, sat in a corner, a cruel reminder of innocent intentions shattered by evil. The scene told a story of unimaginable horror. The medical examiner's findings would later reveal the brutal extent of Eliana's final hours. She had suffered severe trauma to both her head and body, for puncture wounds marked her cheeks, while a devastating piercing wound to her forehead had penetrated her skull. A deep laceration carved across her neck told of her killer's savage determination. Some details of the crime scene were too horrific to share publicly, too brutal to speak aloud. But what haunted investigators most was the evidence that Eliana hadn't died quickly. Some of her wounds showed initial signs of healing, a terrible indication that she had remained alive for hours after the initial attack, alone and suffering in the darkness of that abandoned house. The crime scene investigation revealed the instruments of torture: a handheld drill, a screwdriver, and a box cutter lay on the dining room table, their surfaces telling tales through DNA evidence. The precise alignment of Eliana's wounds matched these tools exactly, speaking to the methodical nature of her killer's cruelty. But perhaps the most damning evidence lay in the DNA samples recovered from Eliana's body. In a twist of dark irony, her killer's savage attack would provide the very evidence needed to identify him. The DNA would be run through law enforcement databases, where it would find a match. Not just any match, but one that would reveal how preventable this tragedy had been. As crime scene technicians photographed and collected evidence, a picture emerged not just of a murder, but of a fundamental failure of society's safeguards. This abandoned house, which should have been secured, had become a torture chamber. A registered sex offender, who should have been monitored, had been free to stalk the streets. A school system, which should have called when Eliana didn't arrive, had remained silent. When Eliana's identity was confirmed through dental records, the task of notifying her family fell to seasoned detectives who thought they'd seen everything. But nothing could prepare them for telling parents that their daughter had suffered such a fate mere blocks from where they'd last seen her alive. The abandoned house at 9412 Fuller Avenue had claimed its victim, but it had also exposed the deadly consequences of urban decay, failed systems, and society's blind spots. Now, investigators turned their attention to the DNA evidence that would lead them to a killer who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The DNA match came back with a name that would make veteran investigators' stomachs turn: Christopher Whitaker, age 43, a registered sex offender from Tennessee with a history that read like a warning sign in flashing neon lights. The man who had stalked Cleveland streets that January morning wasn't a stranger to the justice system. He was its frequent guest, repeatedly released back into society despite escalating violence. Whitaker's criminal history painted a portrait of a predator in evolution. In 1998, his first major conviction came for robbery, grand theft, and burglary, coupled with aggravated and felonious assault. Despite the severity of these charges, the case was mysteriously dismissed, the first of many times the system would fail to recognize the danger he posed. But it was his 2005 crime that should have been the red flag impossible to ignore. The details were chillingly similar to Eliana's case. He had lured a woman into his home under the pretense of using his bathroom. Once inside, the facade dropped. He threatened her with scissors, stabbed her in the neck, and choked her before sexually assaulting her. The violence was calculated, premeditated, a dress rehearsal for what was to come. For this brutal attack, Whitaker served just 4 years. 4 years for attempted murder and sexual assault. By 2009, he was back on the streets, now registered as a sex offender. In 2012, another charge surfaced, aggravated theft, but somehow he avoided prison time. For the next 5 years, he walked free, a predator among prey, made him appear more honorable, more desirable. Near discoveries became part of the thrill. Once, a neighbor from Sophia's floor almost caught them in the stairwell. Miguel smoothly transitioned into a discussion about building maintenance, his hand still warm from where it had been on Sophia's waist seconds before. The neighbor walked away convinced she had interrupted a routine tenant management conversation. The building's security system became both challenge and ally. Miguel knew every blind spot, every camera angle. He timed his movements between floors with precision, using service elevators and back stairwells during peak hours. His construction background provided the perfect excuse for his presence in any part of the building at any time. Sophia's diary entries from this period, discovered later, revealed how completely she had bought into his deception. He's so careful with my heart, always mindful of the complexity of our situation. Sometimes I see such pain in his eyes when he talks about his marriage ending. It makes me love him more, knowing how deeply he feels responsibility toward others. What she couldn't know was that the pain in Miguel's eyes was carefully practiced in front of mirrors. His stories rehearsed to perfection, every gesture and expression designed to reinforce his carefully constructed narrative. The playground project neared completion, but Miguel had already established plenty of reasons to remain in contact. His role as building owner-manager gave him legitimate cause to be seen visiting Sophia's apartment. His construction company's ongoing projects at her school maintained their professional connection. Every aspect of their relationship was built on a foundation of plausible deniability. As autumn approached, Miguel began leaving small traces of himself in Sophia's apartment. A spare phone charger, a coffee mug, subtle markers of growing intimacy. Each item was carefully chosen to be generic enough not to raise suspicions if discovered, yet personal enough to make Sophia feel their relationship was progressing. The true masterpiece of his deception was how he used one lie to reinforce another. To Rachel, his frequent presence in the building was explained by his hands-on management style. To Sophia, his irregular hours and sudden departures were attributed to his ongoing divorce proceedings. Each woman's understanding of his situation helped cover his tracks with the other. The affair was now fully established, running like a well-oiled machine. Miguel had successfully created another complete life just one floor above his existing one. It was a balancing act that would require constant attention and adjustment, but he had done this before. What he couldn't know was that this time, his carefully constructed house of cards would eventually collapse, bringing down not just his multiple lives but affecting an entire community in ways he could never have anticipated. As winter approached and the holiday season loomed, Miguel faced the first real test of his dual life management. But for now, he stood in Sophia's apartment, watching the sunset through her windows, identical to the ones in his home below, master of all he surveyed. The perfect deception was complete. The real challenge of maintaining it was just beginning. As winter melted into spring, Miguel's confidence in his deception grew dangerously bold. The service elevator became his personal escape route, his timing perfected to the night maintenance schedule. At 11:43 p.m., when Jose started his rounds from the top floor down, Miguel would slip from Sophia's apartment to his own, the whir of the ancient service elevator masking his movements. The building's gym became their midnight paradise. Miguel manipulated the security logs, creating ghost accounts for late-night access, while teaching Sofia to avoid the main cameras. Their encounters became increasingly reckless against the mirrored walls, in the sauna, their passion leaving steamy handprints on glass that the morning staff would quietly clean away. His business trips were masterpieces of deception. While Rachel believed he was in San Diego, he was actually with Sofia in the penthouse suite he kept for such occasions. When Sofia thought he was at construction sites, he was vacationing with Rachel. The building staff were unwitting accomplices, generously tipped to mention Miguel's inspections at strategic times. The emotional entanglement deepened dangerously. Sofia began leaving her classroom door unlocked during lunch, thrilling to quick, stolen kisses between periods. Rachel received elaborate bouquets at her office, each delivered with handwritten notes that Miguel crafted to assuage his growing guilt. The lies multiplied like cancer cells. To Rachel, late-night building emergencies. To Sofia, complicated divorce proceedings. To the staff, confidential renovations requiring odd hours. Building a picture that no one wanted to see but couldn't ignore. By August 25th, the school had no choice but to act. Kevin's suspension from the swim team made the local news, another crack in the facade of Magnolia Heights' perfect veneer. The second blackmail demand arrived on August 27th, $100,000 this time, with copies of text messages that would destroy them both. Sarah withdrew the money without hesitation, emptying an account James had set aside for charity donations. Detective Torres would later trace the money's path through 5 different drop locations, each one leading closer to the tragedy that was about to unfold. She was desperate, Torres would testify, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. The final night, August 28th, played out like a Greek tragedy. Security footage shows Sarah pacing her kitchen at 11:47 p.m., phone clutched to her ear like a lifeline. Her last conversation with Kevin, captured by the pool house security system, revealed 2 people who had lost all touch with reality. Sarah's plan was simple in its desperation. They would run away together, start fresh somewhere no one knew them. She had money, connections, dreams of a new life. But Kevin's response shattered more than just their fantasy. "I'm 17, he said, his voice barely a whisper on the recording. When Sarah protested that age was just a number, his reply would later echo through the courtroom. "No, it's evidence." The silence that followed lasted exactly 42 seconds. In less than 24 hours, one of them would be dead, and the other's life would be destroyed forever. But in that moment, in the quiet of a Memphis night, 2 people faced the reality of what they'd become, and what it would cost them both. The tension in Magnolia Heights reached its breaking point in the final days of August 2018. As Lisa Anderson's email to the school board circulated through administrative offices, the carefully maintained privacy of Memphis's elite suburb began to crumble. That email changed everything, Principal Margaret Rhodes would later testify. When a parent explicitly accuses a neighbor of exploiting their child, we can't look the other way, no matter who's involved. The police tip line, which had been quiet for months, suddenly lit up with anonymous calls. Detective Torres's log from August 29th reveals the community's growing panic. 10:15 a.m. Caller reports suspicious meetings in Mitchell Pool House. 11:30 a.m. Anonymous tip about expensive gifts to a minor. 2:45 p.m. Local business owner reports concerning behavior behind Methodist Church. 4:20 p.m. School staff member expresses concerns about student welfare. But it was the video that arrived in Sarah's inbox on August 30th that sent everything spiraling toward its tragic conclusion. Security footage from her own pool house, somehow accessed and copied, showing intimate moments that left no room for denial. The blackmailer knew exactly what they were doing, Detective Torres would later explain. They didn't just threaten to expose the relationship. They proved they could destroy both lives with a single mouse click. The demand was simple: $200,000 by midnight, or the video would be sent to every phone in Magnolia Heights. Sarah's response, captured by her home security system. In 1998, his first major conviction came for robbery, grand theft, and burglary, coupled with aggravated and felonious assault. Despite the severity of these charges, the case was mysteriously dismissed, the first of many times the system would fail to recognize the danger he posed. But it was his 2005 crime that should have been the red flag impossible to ignore. The details were chillingly similar to Eliana's case. He had lured a woman into his home under the pretense of using his bathroom. Once inside, the facade dropped. He threatened her with scissors, stabbed her in the neck, and choked her before sexually assaulting her. The violence was calculated, premeditated, a dress rehearsal for what was to come. For this brutal attack, Whitaker served just 4 years. 4 years for attempted murder and sexual assault. By 2009, he was back on the streets, now registered as a sex offender. In 2012, another charge surfaced, aggravated theft, but somehow he avoided prison time. For the next 5 years, he walked free, a predator among prey. Made him appear more honorable, more desirable. Near discoveries became part of the thrill. Once, a neighbor from Sophia's floor almost caught them in the stairwell. Miguel smoothly transitioned into a discussion about building maintenance, his hand still warm from where it had been on Sophia's waist seconds before. Showed a woman unraveling. She spent 3 hours pacing her kitchen, making frantic calls to her bank, her lawyer, and finally, fatefully, to Kevin. At Memphis East High School, the whispers had become a roar. Kevin's sudden removal from the swim team sparked speculation that reached far beyond the pool deck. Coach Thompson found himself fielding calls from college recruiters, trying to explain the unexplainable. How do you tell Texas that your star swimmer isn't just slipping? He's drowning in something you can't even discuss. Thompson would later ask the grand jury. Lisa Anderson's worst fears were confirmed when she received an anonymous envelope at the hospital where she worked. Inside were photos of her son leaving expensive restaurants with Sarah, receipts for jewelry, hotel charges from neighboring towns. The final item was a handwritten note. Do you know where your son really is when you're working nights? The confrontation that followed shook the Anderson household to its foundation. Lisa, still in her scrubs from a 12-hour shift, waited up until Kevin came home at 2 a.m. I didn't even recognize him anymore, Lisa would sob during her testimony. When I showed him the photos, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with these dead eyes and said, "You don't understand our love." By September 1st, the school administration had no choice but to take official action. An emergency meeting was called. A spare phone charger, a coffee mug, subtle markers of growing intimacy. Each item was carefully chosen to be generic enough not to raise suspicions if discovered, yet personal enough to make Sophia feel their relationship was progressing. The true masterpiece of his deception was how he used one lie to reinforce another. To Rachel, his frequent presence in the building was explained by his hands-on management style. To Sophia, his irregular hours and sudden departures were attributed to his ongoing